You have come to find a workshop at the edge of the town, where a man sits every day shaping gunflints for the army. And although the army is not fighting just now, the work goes on, because the flints must be ready, because the peace may not last, because there is always a need for a sharp edge and a spark. The lane bends slightly to the left, and then the cottages thin out, and you see the workshop ahead, a low building set a little way back from the track behind a patch of nettles and winter-bare elder. It is timber-framed, with wattle and daub infill painted the colour of old cream, and a roof of thatch that overhangs the walls like a heavy brow, and at the front a door stands open, propped with a lump of chalk, and a small window of thick greenish glass catches the grey light with a dull gleam. A single chimney at the far gable end breathes a lazy thread of smoke which curls upwards and then flattens as it meets the mist, and the whole building seems to have grown out of the ground, quiet and patient, a part of the landscape rather than something placed upon it. The beaten earthyard in front is rutted and scattered, with tiny fragments of flint that glint underfoot, and to one side a stack of raw flint nodules is heaped against the wall, each one round and chalky and heavy-looking, some cracked open to show the dark heart inside. The air here has a slightly different smell, a dry, mineral tang like the dust after a stone has been struck, and under it the faintest trace of leather and old ash. You step through the open doorway, and the light inside is dimmer, filled with a soft, suspended haze that makes the edges of everything seem gentle and unfocused. The floor is of packed earth, hard and cool, and worn into shallow hollows where the stool feet have rested for years, and along one wall the flint nodules are stacked in careful piles that reach almost to the low ceiling beams. The workshop is orderly in a way that speaks of long habit. A long wooden bench runs across the room beneath the window, its surface pocked with thousands of tiny white scars where sharp edges have bitten into the wood. And on it lie a few simple tools arranged in a neat row, a heavy hammerstone of grey-brown quartzite worn smooth by handling, a slender antler tine with the tip polished to a dull shine, a notched iron steek fixed into the bench top, and a folded piece of camphor lead out like grey-black triangles of cabjaws had made. A leather knee-pad, stained dark and supple, hangs over the edge of the bench, and beside it a shallow wooden tray catches the fine, pale chippings that fall during the work. In the corner, a small hearth holds a few glowing embers behind a loose grating, giving off just enough warmth to take the chill from the air, and on a shelf above it an open ledger and a stub of a candle sit in patient silence. The window glass, imperfect and warped, lets in a muted light that falls slantwise across the bench and catches the suspended dust motes as they drift in a slow, aimless current, and the only colour in the room is the pale grey of the flints, the brown of the tools, and the deep, muted green of the glass. The knapper is already at his bench, and he does not turn when you enter, does not lift his head or pause in his labour, as if the opening of the door and the soft step of a visitor are things that happen in another room entirely. He is a man of middle years, with a quiet face and hands that are still and constant, dressed in a simple smock of unbleached linen over a woolen waistcoat, and a cloth cap sits on his head. He holds a raw flint nodule in his left hand, cradled against the leather pad on his knee, and in his right hand he holds the hammerstone, and he brings it down with a precise, unhurried movement, and the flint splits with a clean, damp sound, a low crack that is neither loud nor startling, but simply a note in the quiet of the room. A flake falls away and drops into the tray, and he turns the core over, studying the newly bared surface with a careful, practiced gaze, and then he strikes again, and the rhythm of it is as steady as the breathing of the building itself. You settle onto a wooden stool in the corner near the door, a stool that seems to have been placed there for just this purpose, worn and low and half hidden in the shadow cast by the stacked nodules, and you watch. The knapper does not acknowledge your presence, does not offer a word of greeting or a glance. And somehow this absence of notice is a comfort, because it means that the work will go on exactly as it would if you were not there, unchanged and unbroken, a small, quiet engine of patience turning through the morning. The only sound now is the soft, repeated clink of flint against flint, and beneath it the faint hiss of the embers in the corner, and behind that the deepest, widest silence, a silence that seems to fill the room like water filling a pool. The napper taps the edge of a flake with the antler tine, pressing a tiny half-moon of stone free, and the chipping falls into the tray with a sound so small it is almost not there at all. A whisper of a sound that comes and goes and comes again. He works with a slow, steady pace, never hurrying, never pausing longer than it takes to turn the stone in his fingers, and his breathing is deep and even, a faint rise and fall of the smock over his chest that matches the beat of the hammer and the tick of the antler. Outside, the mist begins to thin a little as the sun climbs behind the clouds, and the light in the room grows by imperceptible degrees, the dust motes shifting their slow dance, the shadows on the bench softening and lengthening. A blackbird starts to sing somewhere out in the hedgerow beyond the workshop, but its song is sporadic and drowsy, a few notes and then a pause, a few more notes and then silence again, as if the bird is not fully awake and is only trying out the day. The smell of the workshop settles around you, a layered thing, the dry, chalky scent of flint dust, the metallic pang of freshly fractured stone, the faint smokiness from the hearth, and underneath it all, the clean, warm smell of the leather knee pad and the old wood of the bench. You can feel the cool air on your cheeks and the solid, reassuring pressure of the stool beneath you, and you let your hands rest on your knees, and you let your gaze settle on the napper's hands as they move through their familiar, endless task. The napper picks up another nodule from the pile nearest the bench, turning it over in his hands to feel its weight, its thickness, the way the chalky cortex coats the darker stone within. He taps it with the hammerstone, not to break it, but to hear the note, a low, dull ring that tells him something about the quality of the flint, about the way the internal grain runs, about where the first strike should fall. This small moment of testing is done without hurry, without any outward sign of decision, and then he sets the nodule on the leather pad and raises the hammerstone again, and the rhythm resumes. The sound of the strike is a little different each time, depending on the shape of the nodule, the angle of the blow, the place on the stone where the hammer falls. But the differences are so small that after a while they blur into a single, continuous, soothing pattern. A pattern that seems to have been sounding in this room since the day it was built, and will sound on until the walls themselves fall down. You watch the napper's face from your corner, and it is a face of deep concentration that is also, somehow, a face of complete rest. The brow smooth, the mouth relaxed, the eyes half-lidded, as they follow the line of the flint's edge. He does not look up at the window to check the weather, does not glance at the door if a distant cart rumbles by on the lane, does not pause to stretch or rub his neck or draw a deep breath. He simply works, and the work holds him in a steady, timeless calm. You lose track of the minutes, because the room does not offer any measure of time beyond the slow shifting of the light and the gradual lengthening of the shadow cast by the window frame across the floor. The stack of raw nodules on one side of the room seems immense and unchanging, a mountain of grey chalk that will take 1,000 mornings to reduce to finished flints, and yet you know that each day a small portion of it is transformed, one nodule at a time, one flake at a time, and the finished gun flints are wrapped in canvas and sent away to the tower armory, and then the pile is replenished, and the work goes on. There is a ledger on the shelf that records the numbers, the dates, the deliveries, but in this moment the ledger is closed, the numbers are sleeping, and the only thing that matters is the stone in the napper's hand and the edge he is raising on its surface. The gun flint that will eventually sit in the jaws of a musket lock, ready to strike a spark against the steel frizzen, is here being born in a long, slow process of tiny removals, each one a fraction of an inch, each one requiring the same careful attention. And there is something in that slowness that settles your breathing, that draws your shoulders down and your eyelids lower, that makes the outside world seem very far away and very unimportant. Time passes, and the only change is that the blackbird outside grows a little more confident in its song, and the mist lifts enough that you can see, through the window glass, the faint outline of a poplar tree standing alone in the field beyond. The napper finishes a flake, sets it on the folded canvas, and picks up the next nodule without a word, without a sigh, without any sign that this repetition means anything less than the whole world. You become aware of the texture of your own clothing, the weave of your sleeve against your wrist, the cool air on the back of your neck, and all of these small sensations drift through your awareness like the dust motes drifting through the beam of light. You blink slowly, and the scene before you blurs and then sharpens again, the napper's hand still moving, the hammerstone still rising and falling. the tray still filling with a gentle drift of pale, angular chippings. The room is so quiet that you can hear the tiny crunch of the flint flakes settling, one on top of another, in the bottom of the tray, and this sound is so delicate that it seems to belong to the silence itself, a silence that has color and texture and weight. After a long while, a woman pushes open the door quietly and sets a mug of small beer on the corner of the bench, withdrawing without a word, and the napper does not pause, but later, when his hands reach a natural stopping point, he will drink it in slow sips, his eyes still on the flint, his mind still inside the work. For now the mug sits steaming faintly, and the smell of the malt and the slight bitterness of the hops joins the other smells of the workshop, blending into the calm, and you watch the steam curl upwards in a thin, white ribbon that mimics the smoke from the chimney, fragile and fleeting. You feel the stool beneath you, solid and steady, and you draw a long breath that tastes of flint dust and damp wool, and you let your eyelids fall half-closed. The napper shifts on his stool, adjusting the leather pad on his knee, and the stool creaks once, a low wooden sound that holds the memory of 1,000 such adjustments, and then the rhythm of the tap, tap, tap returns, and the creak is absorbed back into the quiet, and the day continues. The grey morning in Brandon, the empty lane, the flint cottage walls, the mist and the river, all of it fades into the background of your mind, and what remains is this single, sunlit rectangle of a room, the shape of a man at his bench, and the soft, steady clink of flint being shaped, over and over, without end, as the day begins. Your gaze drifts from the napper's hands to the far wall of the workshop, where the raw flint nodules are stacked in careful piles that rise from the beaten earth floor to a height just beneath the low ceiling beams. The wall itself is of wattle and daub, its surface uneven and patched with age, and the flints are arranged against it not as a disorderly heap, but as a deliberate store, a library of stone sorted by size and shape, and perhaps by something less definable, something the napper knows by feel. Each nodule is a rounded, lumpen thing, coated in a thick white cortex that looks like chalk but is in fact a part of the flint itself, a weathered skin formed over millennia beneath the ground. The cortex varies in thickness, in color, in the way it powders slightly when touched, and it hides the dark, glassy interior the way a closed book hides its words. The pile nearest the bench is the one the napper draws from most often, and its topmost nodules sit at about the height of the bench surface so that he can reach them without rising from his stool, and the nodules here are a little smaller, a little more uniform, already chosen once from a larger store and brought inside for the day's work. At the far end of the room, against the opposite wall, the reserve pile rises nearly to the rafters, and these nodules are larger and more irregular, some as big as 2 clenched fists together, others flatter and elongated, and they cast deep, still shadows across the packed earth floor. These flints came from the chalk pits a mile away, where men dig down through the soft white bedrock to reach a seam of dark flint that runs through it like a ribbon of night. The seam is not continuous but appears in lens-shaped bodies, pockets and bands that the diggers follow by instinct and experience, and when they find a good one they prize the nodules out with iron bars and load them into carts that trundle back to Brandon along lanes rutted by the weight. The nodules emerge from the chalk coated in a fine white dust that clings to the cortex and dries to a pale crust, and even after they are stacked in the workshop, this dust continues to sift off them in tiny, invisible amounts, settling on the floor and mixing with the flint chippings from the knapping, so that the air in the room carries a permanent, gentle taste of chalk. The diggers work year-round except when the ground freezes too hard for the bars to bite, and they know this particular seam the way a farmer knows his fields, by its subtle variations in color and hardness, and by the sound the pick makes when it strikes. The napper does not go to the pits himself. The nodules are brought to him, and he receives them with the same quiet attention he gives to everything else, inspecting each load, sorting the good from the flawed, stacking them in his own order that no one else would understand, but that makes perfect sense to his hands. On the bench beside the working area, a single raw nodule now rests, newly selected from the pile. The napper has paused in his flaking to choose it, and the pause is part of the rhythm rather than a break in it. A moment when the hammerstone is set down and the hands become instruments of assessment rather than of shaping. He turns the nodule over in his fingers with the slow, deliberate care of someone reading a text in a language that predates speech, and you watch him examine it from every angle, holding it close to his eyes to see the minute cracks and inclusions that might be hidden under the cortex. The nodule is roughly oval, slightly flattened on one side where it lay against another stone in the seam for 1,000,000 years, and it weighs perhaps 2 pounds, a satisfying heft that makes the napper's wrist flex slightly as he turns it. The outer cortex is not pure white, but mottled with patches of grey and faint ochre, and in places it has been worn thin by the friction of the earth, revealing the darker flint beneath like a glimpse of deep water through thinning ice. The napper rubs his thumb across the surface, feeling the texture, which is somewhere between chalk and porcelain, slightly gritty, but also smooth in the way that only very old things are smooth. This rubbing is not an idle gesture. It tells him about the thickness of the cortex, the presence of hidden fossil casts, the possibility of a frost fracture that might shatter the nodule before it can be worked. His thumb moves back and forth with a soft, dry sound, and a little powder falls onto the leather pad, where it joins the other dust that has accumulated there over the years, a fine patina of chalk and flint that has worked itself into the fibers of the leather until it is almost indistinguishable from the material itself. After he has felt the surface, the napper holds the nodule up to the light from the window, turning it slowly so that the muted greenish glow passes across its contours. The window glass is thick and full of tiny bubbles and ripples, and the light it admits is soft and diffuse, but it is enough to reveal the subtle variations in the cortex's opacity, the way some areas seem to glow faintly from within, while others remain wholly opaque. The napper is looking for the places where the flint beneath is closest to the surface, the thin patches of cortex that will yield to the first strike, the natural planes of weakness that run through the stone like the grain in wood. He might see a faint hairline crack that follows a curve around the nodule, a crack that is not a flaw but a promise, a line along which the stone wants to break, and he will remember its position without marking it, storing the information in his fingers and his shoulders, which have learned more about flint than any word could hold. The nodule rotates in the grey light, and the shadows shift across its lump and surface, and you think of a small distant planet turning in a quiet void, a world made entirely of chalk and silica and time, and the napper is the only astronomer who will ever study it. Once the visual inspection is complete, the napper lowers the nodule back to the leather pad and reaches for the small iron testing hammer that hangs from a loop on the side of the bench. This hammer is not the heavy quartzite hammerstone used for breaking open the nodules. It is a smaller tool with a flat face and a short handle of turned ash, and its purpose is not to strike with force, but to tap, to ring the nodule like a bell and listen to the answer. The napper holds the nodule loosely in his left hand, balancing it on the pad of his thumb and 2 fingers, and with the iron hammer he gives it a series of light, rapid taps around its circumference, each one a little sharper than a finger flick, each one producing a tiny, distinct note. The sound varies from place to place, and the napper leans his head slightly to one side, listening with an attention that seems almost musical, as if the stone is singing to him in a language of clicks and pings that only he can translate. A good, solid area of flint will ring with a high, clear note, almost bell-like, a crisp sound that decays quickly into silence. A flawed area, a place where the stone is cracked or contains a fossil void, will give a dull, flat thud, a dead sound that falls away without resonance. The napper taps the nodule a dozen times, moving the hammer from the thick end to the thin edge, from the flatter face to the more convex back, and each tap is a question, and each answer builds a map of the interior in his mind, a map that shows the bounds of the workable flint and the regions that must be discarded. The tapping continues for a minute or two, and then the napper is satisfied, and he sets the iron hammer back in its loop, and holds the nodule on the leather pad with both hands, looking at it once more with a gaze that is calm and unsurprised, a gaze that has seen thousands of nodules and will see thousands more, and each one has been met with the same careful, unhurried assessment. The cortex is a mask, and he has learned to see behind it, to feel the shape of the dark stone, hidden within the way a blind man feels a face and understands the person. The flint inside is not uniform, it is a stone of great variety, and even within a single nodule the color and the quality can shift, from a deep, glossy black that flakes like glass to a lighter grey that is more granular and less suited to holding a sharp edge. The napper can tell, from the way the nodule felt under his thumb and from the way it sang under the hammer, whether the flint will be of the first quality, suitable for a musket lock that must spark reliably in the damp and the cold, or whether it will only be useful for lesser purposes and must be sorted into a different pile for the knappers who make simpler tools. This nodule, the one now resting on the leather pad, is a good one. You can see it in the way he sets it down with a certain gentleness, a particular precision of placement, leaving it on the left side of the bench where the next workable blanks will be struck, rather than returning it to the stack or tossing it into the bin for flawed stone. The light from the window shifts a little as a cloud passes over the sun, and for a moment the workshop dims, the colours muting from muted green-grey to a deeper, more shadowed tone, and the nodule on the bench becomes a dark shape on a dark ground, its contours softened. The napper does not seem to notice. He has turned slightly on his stool to regard the reserve pile against the far wall, his hands resting on his knees now, the assessment done, the rhythm paused but not broken, like a singer drawing breath before the next phrase. You follow his gaze to the far pile, and you see what he sees, a wall of stone that is also a wall of stored time, each nodule a capsule of geological history, each one formed in the warm, shallow seas that covered this land 80 million years ago, when the chalk was being laid down as a fine rain of microscopic skeletons falling through the water. The flint formed in burrows and voids in the chalk, a gel of dissolved silica that gradually hardened into the dark, brittle stone that now sits in stacks in a Suffolk workshop, waiting to be turned into an instrument of fire. None of this is written down in the workshop. The napper may not know the words for Cretaceous or silica gel or microscopic coccoliths, but he knows the stone in a way that is older than words, a knowledge stored in the nerves of his hands, in the curve of his spine as he bends to his work, in the way he can look at a chalky lump and see the sharp edges that will one day strike a spark or rain-soaked field in Spain or Flanders, or wherever the army will go when the peace breaks. He rises from his stool now, a slow, careful movement that is not a stretch but simply a change of position, and he walks across the workshop to the far wall. His footsteps are soft on the packed earth, the soles of his boots making a faint, dry scuff that barely registers. And he stands before the reserve pile with his arms at his sides, studying the nodules with the same detached attention a librarian might give to a shelf of unread books. From this distance, you can see the variations in the pile, the larger nodules at the bottom providing a stable base, the smaller ones laid above, the whole arrangement so carefully balanced that it seems almost architectural, a dry stone wall in miniature. The napper reaches out and touches one of the upper nodules, not to lift it, but to feel its condition, to see if it has dried too much since it was quarried. For flint that loses its internal moisture too quickly can become brittle and unpredictable. His fingers trace the contours of the cortex, and a little more chalk dust sifts down, joining the fine, pale layer that covers everything in the workshop. The bench, the tools, the floor, even the napper's cap and shoulders, so that he himself seems to be gradually turning into a part of the room, a statue carved from the same material he works. After a moment he withdraws his hand apparently satisfied and turns back toward the bench, and you notice that he has not chosen a new nodule from the reserve pile after all. The one on the bench is still the one he will work next, and his visit to the far wall was simply a check, a quiet reassurance that the stores are holding up, that there is no shortage of raw material, that tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that will all begin with a pile of chalky nodules waiting to be turned into gunflints. He settles back onto his stool, the wooden legs creaking once, and picks up the selected nodule again, but not to strike it yet. First he needs the heavy hammerstone, and he reaches for it with a slow, sure movement, lifting it from the bench and feeling its weight in his palm. The hammerstone is the color of river water, a smooth, grey-brown quartzite that has been worn to a perfect fit by years of handling, and it is heavy enough that you can see the tendons in the napper's wrist tighten slightly as he takes it up. He holds it for a moment, the nodule in his left hand, the hammerstone in his right, and the workshop seems to hold its breath around him, the dust motes suspended, the the small fire in the corner giving a single soft pop of resin. The grey light lies across his shoulders, and his face is calm and set, and the whole room feels gathered into this single, suspended instant before the first blow falls. Then he shifts the nodule on the leather pad, finding the angle that the tap of the iron hammer told him was the right one, and he raises the hammerstone a few inches, and the first strike comes down with a clean, damp crack that opens the nodule along its hidden seam, and a flake of dark flint separates and falls into the tray, revealing the glossy interior for the first time. The cortex is breached, the work begins again, and the rhythm of the morning, which had softened into this moment of assessment and selection, now picks up its steady beat, tap, 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 as constant and soothing as the first rain of autumn on a still pond. You remain on your stool in the corner, your hands resting quietly in your lap, and you watch the napper resume his shaping, and you let your gaze return to the far wall and the stacks of nodules, whose stillness is now a part of your own stillness, a deep, quiet presence that asks nothing of you. The raw flints stand in their piles, ancient and patient, and you understand without needing to think it that they will still be there when the day ends and the workshop door is latched, still there when the moon rises over the thatched roof, still there in the moon rises over the thatched roof, still there in the morning when the mist returns from the river and the napper walks up the lane from his cottage and opens the door to begin again. Each nodule is a beginning, and each finished gun flint on the canvas is an ending, and between the two lies the slow, careful work of the day, a work that is no more hurried than the growth of the chalk seam, no more anxious than the turning of the earth. Your breathing has slowed to match the pace of the tapping, and the edges of your thoughts have grown soft and blurred, and the chapter of your own day has become as simple as a nodule of flint, waiting in a quiet stack, content to be still. The morning light grows stronger by slow, imperceptible degrees, moving from a grey dimness to a soft, diffused glow that fills the workshop like water rising in a basin, and you notice the change, not all at once but gradually, the way you notice the tide coming in only after it has already covered the sand. The small window set into the wall above the bench is made of thick, greenish glass that was poured and spun when the workshop was built, and its surface is uneven, full of ripples and tiny bubbles frozen in place, so that the light that passes through it is transformed, bent and softened, given a faint underwater quality. Outside, the sun is climbing behind the thinning clouds, and the beam that enters through the window falls in a distinct, slanting shaft that cuts across the dusty air and lands on the bench top, illuminating a rectangle of scarred wood with a pale amber-tinted glow. Within this shaft of light, the dust motes that are always present in the workshop become suddenly visible. Thousands of tiny particles suspended in the air, moving not with any purpose but with a slow, aimless drift, rising and falling in currents too gentle to feel. They are made of flint dust, chalk powder, fine wood fibers from the bench, and ash from the small hearth. All of them mingled together into a single quiet dance that has been going on since the first hammerstroke of the day and will continue long after the last. You watch the dust motes from your stool in the corner, and the sight of them is deeply soothing, a visual equivalent of the soft tapping rhythm that has become the heartbeat of the room. Each mote is a tiny fleck of light, catching the sunbeam and glowing for a moment before passing out of it into the shadow and vanishing, and then another mote takes its place, and another in an endless, gentle succession. The light itself has a quality that is particular to this time of morning, not yet the full, flat brightness of midday, but a tentative golden light that seems to be testing the room, exploring its corners, touching each surface with a cautious, painterly brush. It falls on the napper's shoulders as he bends to his work, highlighting the weave of his linen smock and the faint dusting of pale powder that has settled there, and it catches the edge of the leather knee-pad and the dark, polished tip of the antler-tine, and it gleams dully on the iron stake fixed into the bench, and it makes the finished gun flints on the folded canvas glitter with a faint, greasy luster, as if they are not stone at all but pieces of frozen night. The workshop itself is orderly in a way that speaks of long habit and a mind that finds comfort in the proper placement of things, and as the light grows stronger, you can see more of its details, each one a small, quiet fact that adds to the whole. The long wooden bench is the center of the room, running beneath the window and extending almost the full length of the wall, and its surface is scarred with thousands of tiny white pot marks where the pressure flaking has been done, each mark a record of a single precise moment when a flake of flint detached and the tool bit into the wood beneath. The bench is made of oak, darkened by age and handling, and its front edge is worn smooth and slightly rounded where the knapper's forearms have rested over the years. A shallow depression that fits the shape of his arms exactly, as if the wood has slowly molded itself to him. Along the back of the bench, against the wall, the tools are arranged in a neat row, each one resting in its own accustomed spot, and there is a particular order to them that you begin to perceive as your gaze travels slowly across the scene. The heavy hammerstone on the far left, then the smaller testing hammer of iron with its turned ash handle, then the antler tine, then a spare tine of slightly different thickness, then a small block of beeswax for dressing the leather, and finally a folded ranag of plinth. Nothing is out of place, nothing is jumbled or hurried. The arrangement has the quiet inevitability of a musical score, each instrument waiting for its moment. Beneath the bench, on the packed earth floor, sits the shallow wooden tray that catches the waste flakes, and it is half full now with a litter of pale grey and dark grey chippings, some as thin as a fingernail, others thicker and more irregular, all of them sharp-edged and glittering faintly in the light that spills over the bench edge. The tray is made of elm, its corners dovetailed together with simple, strong joints, and its surface is polished by the constant slide of flint fragments, so that the wood inside gleams with a dull, silvery sheen. Beside the tray, on the floor, is a larger bin woven from willow withies, and into this the knapper throws the flawed nodules and the larger waste pieces that cannot be used for anything else, the ones that will eventually be carted away to fill potholes in the lane. The bin is nearly full, and the flints inside it catch the light in a jumble of angles, a heap of rejected stone that is also, in its own way, beautiful. Your attention moves from the bench to the low stool on which the knapper sits, a three-legged stool of ash wood with a seat hollowed by decades of use. Its surface dark and smooth, its legs splayed slightly to give it stability on the uneven floor. The stool creaks when the knapper shifts his weight, a low wooden sound that seems to come from deep within the fibers of the wood, and this creak is as much a part of the workshop's soundscape as the tap of the hammerstone and the hiss of the embers. To the left of the stool, hanging from a wooden peg driven into the wall, is the knapper's leather apron, a heavy garment of cowhide that has been darkened to a deep chestnut brown and is stiff with age and flint dust, its surface crossed by a network of fine cracks and creases that record every movement the knapper has ever made while wearing it. The apron is not being worn just now, for the morning is not cold and the work does not require its protection, but it hangs on its peg with a patient, waiting air, like a servant standing by in case of need, and its presence is a reminder that the knapper's work is physical and ancient, a trade that has been practiced in this way for thousands of years, since the first human hand picked up a stone and struck it against another stone and discovered the sharp edge within. Beside the apron, on another peg, hangs a small canvas bag containing the knapper's personal items, a clay pipe and a twist of tobacco, a little wooden box of sulphur matches, a spare pair of leather thumb guards worn soft as cloth. The bag sags against the wall, its contents lumpen and obscure, and you can see the faint outline of the pipe bowl pressing through the fabric, a small homely detail that speaks of quiet moments between the work, the brief pause for a pipe at midday, the slow exhalation of smoke that joins the dust motes in the shaft of light. The wall behind the bench is the same, wattle and daub as the rest of the room, its surface patched in places with fresh daub that is a slightly different colour from the old, a paler cream that shows where repairs have been made after a damp winter or a stiff wind, and the daub is cracked in a fine, all-over pattern like the glaze on an old pot, a pattern that seems to shift and change as the light moves across it. The tool that draws your eye most insistently is the heavy hammerstone, which now rests on the bench to the left of the knapper's working area, its surface gleaming with the slight moisture of the knapper's palm. It is a cobble of quartzite, rounded and smoothed by ancient water action before it was ever picked up by a human hand, and it fits the grip with a perfection that no made handle could ever achieve, its contours shaped by rivers that flowed long before this island separated from the continent. The hammerstone is grey-brown, with flecks of darker mineral scattered through it, and one side is flattened from use, worn down by thousands of impacts against flint, so that it has a slight, almost imperceptible facet that catches the light differently from the rest of its surface. The knapper's fingers have polished the stone where they hold it, a glossy patch on the grip that is the color of wet sand, and this patch is renewed every day by the oils of his skin, so that the hammerstone is in a constant, slow state of transformation, being worn away and polished and worn again, a process that will continue until the stone is too small to use and must be replaced by another from the river. Beside the hammerstone sits the smaller testing hammer, the one with the iron head and the ash handle, and its handle is similarly polished by use, the grain of the ash standing out in fine, pale lines that run from the head to the butt, and the iron head itself is dark, with a patina of age, its flat face slightly convex from repeated tapping, its edges rounded and harmless. The antler tine lies in the center of the bench, waiting for the fine work, and it is a slender, slightly curved piece of red deer antler that the knapper has used for many years, selecting it from a shed antler found in the woods, because it had exactly the right shape and density for pressure flaking. The tip of the tine is worn to a blunt, polished point, like the toe of a well-loved shoe, and the base is wrapped in a strip of thin leather to give the fingers a better grip, the leather darkened with sweat and flint dust until it is almost black. The tine is notched near the tip from the repeated pressure of flint edges, a series of tiny parallel grooves that you can only see when the light catches them at the right angle, and these notches are a record of the thousands of gunflints that have been shaped with this tool, each one leaving its microscopic mark. The knapper picks up the tine now, not to use it, but to wipe it with the linen rag, a small habitual gesture of maintenance that is performed without thought, and the motion is so smooth and practiced that it seems like a part of the breathing of the room, one more slow, regular beat in the rhythm of the day. Set into the bench top, near the center of the working area, is the notched iron stake that serves as an anvil for the fine edging work, and it is a simple piece of blacksmithing, a short bar of iron driven into a hole in the bench and secured with a wedge, its upper end flattened and notched with a V-shaped groove that holds the flint blank steady while the knapper applies pressure with the antler tine. The iron stake is dark with age and use, its surface pitted with tiny rust spots that have been polished smooth by the constant abrasion of flint, and the notch itself is burnished to a silvery shine where the edges of hundreds of flints have been pressed against it. Around the base of the stake, the bench wood is stained a darker color from the iron, a faint bloom of rust that has seeped into the fibers and created a small, dark halo, and this stain is a quiet testament to the years the stake has stood in this same spot, unmoving, patient, essential. The leather knee pad hangs over the front edge of the bench now, for the knapper has just shifted it to adjust his position, and you can see it clearly in the growing light, a rectangle of thick cowhide about a foot square, its edges rounded, its surface worn to a dark, waxy smoothness by the constant pressure of flint nodules and the friction of the knapper's thigh. The pad was once a pale tan, you can see, because the edges where the leather has frayed slightly still show the original color beneath the darkened surface, a glimpse of the thing as it was when it was new, before it became saturated with chalk dust and flint powder and the oils of the knapper's hands. The surface of the pad is crossed by a network of fine, shallow cuts, where the sharp edges of the nodules have pressed into it, and these cuts have smoothed over time until they are no longer sharp, but merely a texture, a pattern of lines that tells the story of every nodule that has been shaped on this knee. The pad has a slight hollow in the center where the heaviest pressure is applied, a depression that cups the nodule and holds it steady, and this hollow has been formed not by any deliberate shaping, but by the simple, patient repetition of the same action. 10,000 times, a river of stone wearing a channel through the leather. As you sit on your stool and let your gaze move from tool to tool, you become aware of the silence that underlies the whole scene. A silence that is not empty, but full, made of many small soft sounds layered together. The tap of the hammerstone, the scrape of the antler tine, the settling of the embers in the hearth, the creak of the antler tine, the settling of the embers in the hearth, the quiet of timber and daub, peace. Outside the window, a blackbird begins to sing, and its song is clear and liquid, a series of fluted notes that rise and fall in a pattern that seems almost random, but is in fact full of a music older than any human composition. The blackbird is somewhere in the hedgerow beyond the workshop, perhaps perched on a hawthorn branch or on the top of the flint wall that borders the lane, and its song comes through the thick glass, softened and slightly distorted, so that it blends with the indoor sounds and becomes part of the calm, rather than an interruption. The bird sings for a minute or two, stops, and then sings again, a few more hesitant notes, as if it is trying out the day before committing to it fully, and then it falls silent, and the workshop sounds reclaim their primacy. The light continues to shift, the shaft from the window moving almost imperceptibly across the bench, and the shadows in the corners of the room retreat a little, revealing details that were hidden before. The stack of old canvas wraps on a low shelf, the pile of spare leather for knee pads, a small clay pot of glue made from boiled hooves, its surface cracked and crazed. A spider has built a web across the lower corner of the window frame, a delicate, geometric thing that trembles slightly in the draught from the door, and the web catches the light and holds it in its threads. A tiny, silent harp that will be brushed away when the window is cleaned, but for now is perfect and complete, a small masterpiece of patience. The napper does not notice the web, or if he does, he gives no sign, for his attention is entirely on the flint in his hand and the edge he is shaping, and the web will remain undisturbed until the day ends. You notice now the way the tools sit in easy reach of the napper's hands, arranged in a semicircle around his working area, so that he can pick up the hammerstone, set it down, reach for the antlertine, return it, and take up the linen rag without ever having to turn his head or search with his eyes. This arrangement is the product of years of refinement, each tool finding its place through a long process of small adjustments, a millimetre to the left, a fraction closer to the bench edge, until the layout is so perfectly fitted to the napper's movements that it has become an extension of his body, a second set of limbs that he can use without thought. The hammerstone always returns to the same spot, a slight depression in the bench wood that holds it from rolling, and the antlertine always lies parallel to the bench edge, with its tip pointing toward the window, and the iron testing hammer hangs from its loop at exactly the right height for his hand to find it without looking. This is not organization imposed by an external rule. It is the natural order that grows from a life spent in one place doing one thing, the same way a path forms across a field because people walk the same route day after day until the grass wears away. The napper pauses now, his rhythm halting, not because the work is finished, but because he has noticed a slight dullness on the cutting edge of the flint he is shaping, and he reaches for a small, fine-grained whetstone that sits in a dish of water at the back of the bench. The whetstone is a rectangle of smooth grey slate, and he draws it across the edge of the flint with a light, careful stroke that produces a faint, high-ringing sound, a single note that hangs in the air for a moment and then dissolves. He tests the edge with his thumb, feeling the sharpness, and then sets the whetstone back into its dish, and the water in the dish ripples once and settles, and the rhythm resumes. The whole interruption has taken only a few seconds, and yet it felt in the slow time of the workshop like a distinct event, a small island of action in the broad, calm river of the morning. You let your gaze travel once more around the room, taking in the whole of it, the bench with its tools, the stool with its hollowed seat, the apron on its peg, the stacks of nodules against the far wall, the window with its green glass and its spiderweb, and its shaft of slowly moving light. The workshop is a small world, complete and sufficient, and everything in it has a purpose and a history, a reason for being where it is. The dust motes continue their dance, the light continues its slow crawl across the wood. The blackbird outside sings another few notes, and then falls silent again, and the napper works on, unhurried, unceasing, a still point in the center of the turning day. Your breathing has become deep and regular, your hands resting with a soft, slack weight on your thighs, and the quiet of the workshop has entered you so completely that you can no longer tell where the room ends, and you begin to dissolve into its peaceful, ordered stillness. The napper sets the chosen nodule on the leather pad that covers his left knee, adjusting it with small, careful movements until it sits securely in the slight hollow that years of pressure have worn into the hide. The nodule is the same one he inspected earlier, the oval of chalky grey with the faint ochre mottling, and the thin spot on one side where the cortex is worn almost through to the dark flint beneath. And now it rests cradled against his thigh as if it has always been there, a part of his body that he is only just now becoming aware of. His left hand cups the nodule from below, the the fingers spread to support its weight evenly, the thumb hooked over the top to steady it, and the whole arrangement of hand and leather and stone is so balanced, so naturally settled, that it seems not to be a grip at all, but simply the way things have come to rest after a long, slow settling. The knapper's right hand reaches for the heavy hammerstone, the one of grey-brown quartzite worn smooth by ancient rivers, and his fingers close around it with the same unthinking familiarity, finding the polished patch where the stone fits the palm, the thumb settling into a slight depression that generations of knappers before him have also found, a depression that may have been there when the stone was first taken from the riverbed, or may have been worn into existence by the pressure of human hands over centuries. He does not strike immediately, for there is a moment of stillness that always precedes the first blow, a kind of gathering of attention in which the knapper's whole body seems to settle into a state of readiness, the shoulders lowering slightly, the breath deepening, the eyes fixing on the spot where the hammerstone will fall. The workshop around him holds its peace, the dust motes drifting in their shaft of light, the small fire giving a barely audible whisper of combustion, the blackbird outside pausing mid-song as if it too senses the importance of the moment. And in this stillness you can feel the weight of all the mornings that have come before this one, all the first strikes that have opened all the nodules in the long history of the craft. The knapper's face is calm, the brow smooth, the mouth relaxed, and there is no tension in him anywhere, no sign of effort to come, for the effort has been made so many times that it has become a kind of rest, a movement that the body performs as easily as breathing. The hammerstone rises a few inches, lifted by a flexion of the wrist rather than the whole arm, and then it descends along a short, precise arc that ends on the thin spot of the nodule where the cortex is weakest, and the first blow falls with a quiet, damp crack that is not loud or startling, but simply a sound, a clean, definitive note that seems to have been waiting in the air all morning for its moment to sound. The flint splits open, and a fragment detaches from the main body of the nodule, a roughly triangular piece that falls away onto the leather pad, and then slides into the shallow wooden tray on the floor with a soft, sharp-edged clatter. The fragment is a flake, thin at one edge and thicker at the other, and its freshly exposed surface catches the window light and gleams with a dark, vitreous luster, a surface that has not seen the sun since the Cretaceous seas receded and the chalk was laid down over the flint. The interior of the nodule is now partially revealed, a window of glossy black stone surrounded by the rough white cortex, and the contrast between the two is so stark, the outer chalky skin so dull and the inner flint so bright and mirror-like, that it seems as if the nodule has been hiding a piece of night sky inside its modest shell. The knapper lifts the core slightly, turning it in his left hand so that he can examine the newly bared surface, and the motion is slow and gentle, the same way a reader turns a page in a valuable book. The flint revealed is of good quality, dark as polished jet, with a faint, almost imperceptible translucence at the very edge where the thickness tapers to nothing, and the surface is smooth and conchoidal, marked by the gentle, rippling curves that are characteristic of flint fracture, curves that run across the face of the stone like the rings of a tree or the halls of a fingerprint. There are no inclusions, no frost cracks, no fossil voids that would weaken the stone or cause it to shatter unpredictably under the next blow, and the knapper absorbs this information with a single unhurried glance, the way a sailor reads the surface of the sea and knows the weather. The flint is sound, the core is good, and the work can proceed. He turns the nodule again, settling it back onto the leather pad, with the freshly struck face now oriented upwards and slightly to the left, and the angle of the light falls across it, making the dark flint glisten as if it were wet, though it is dry, merely polished by the fracture, to a surface finer than any abrasive could achieve. The hammerstone rises again, and the second blow falls at a slightly different angle, a little to one side of the first strike, and another flake separates from the core with the same clean, damp sound. A sound that you are beginning to recognize as the voice of the flint itself. A low, particular note that is neither a crack nor a thud, but something in between. A sound of parting, of acquiescence, of a stone allowing itself to be divided along a line that was always there, waiting. This second flake is longer and thinner than the first, a blade-like piece that curves slightly along its length, and it too drops into the tray with a small rattling impact, joining the first flake and the other chippings that have accumulated there since the morning began. The knapper turns the core again, and now a third blow falls, and a fourth, each one following the same rhythm, the same measured pace, the hammerstone describing a short, unvarying arc that begins and ends at the same point in space, as if the tool is tracing a circle in the air that only it can see. The rhythm is not fast, perhaps 5 seconds pass between each strike. Sometimes longer if the knapper pauses to adjust the angle of the core or to brush away a loose fragment with the side of his thumb, and these pauses are not interruptions but part of the rhythm itself. The rests in a piece of music that give the notes their shape. The tray beneath the bench continues to fill, and the fragments that collect there are of various sizes and shapes, each one a small accidental sculpture created by the meeting of hammer and stone. Some are thin and translucent at the edges, the color of smoked glass or strong tea, and these catch the light with a particular intensity, glowing faintly even in the shadow under the bench. Others are thicker, blockier, with a duller surface that reflects only a soft, grey gleam, and these will later be examined and perhaps set aside for other uses, for tinder flints or for the knappers who make simpler tools. The tray is a mosaic of grey and black and white, a slowly growing pile of waste that is also, in its own way, a record of the morning's work, a physical tally of every blow that has been struck. The knapper does not look at the tray. His attention is entirely on the core in his hand, which is gradually shrinking as flake after flake is removed, transforming from a lumpen, chalky nodule into a more regular, concentrated form, a nucleus of workable flint from which the gunflint blanks will eventually be struck. You watch from your stool in the corner, and your eyelids have begun to grow heavy, a gentle, insistent weight that settles over your eyes like a soft cloth, and you blink slowly, once, twice, the scene before you blurring and then sharpening again as your focus wavers. The steady rhythm of the hammerstone is deeply hypnotic, a metronome made of quartzite and leather and human patience, and each strike seems to press a little more of the wakefulness out of you, smoothing the edges of your thoughts until they are as round and soft as river pebbles. The sound of the blows is not repetitive in a way that tires the ear, for each strike produces a slightly different note depending on the thickness of the flake, the angle of the impact, the particular section of the core that is struck, and these variations form a kind of melody, a slow, sparse music that has no tune but moves through a scale of tiny, percussive tones. It is like listening to rain falling on different surfaces, on stone and on wood and on match, each drop a distinct event, but all of them blending into a single continuous sound that is the sound of the morning passing. The knapper removes a 5th flake, and then a 6th, and now the nodule has been reduced by about a third of its original size, the thick cortex stripped away from one entire face to reveal the dark flint beneath, which gleams with a deep, glossy richness. The core is becoming more regular in shape, the knapper working his way around its circumference, removing flakes in a sequence that follows the natural geometry of the stone, a spiral of reduction that the stone itself seems to dictate. The knapper simply following where the flint leads. He holds the core up to the window light again, turning it slowly, and the light shines through the thinner edges with a faint, amber translucence, a glow that seems to come from within the stone itself, as if the flint has soaked up the morning sun and is now releasing it back into the room. The knapper's face, illuminated by this glow, is perfectly calm and still, his eyes half-lidded and focused on something that is not quite the stone and not quite the light, but a point, somewhere between them, a point where the decision about the next strike is made. He sets the core back on the leather pad, and the hammerstone rises again, and the rhythm continues, a slow, steady pulse that you can feel in your own chest now, your breathing aligning itself with the timing of the strikes, so that you exhale as the hammerstone descends and inhale in the pause between. A natural autonomic synchronization that you did not intend and cannot control. The workshop is so quiet that you can hear the faint, dry sound of the flake sliding across the leather pad before it drops. A whisper of friction that is over almost before it begins, and you can hear the tiny, gritty crunch as it lands in the tray among its fellows, and you can hear the knapper's sleeve brush against the bench as he reaches to adjust the angle. A soft, rustling sound that belongs to the world of textiles and human warmth. All of these sounds are lulling, soporific, A lullaby made not of music but of simple physical facts, the facts of a stone being shaped by a hand in a quiet room on a grey morning. The napper pauses now, but only for a moment, to brush a fragment of cortex from the leather pad with the side of his hand. A gesture that is so habitual it seems to happen without any conscious decision, the hand moving on its own to keep the work area clear. The fragment is a thin, chalky rind, white on one side and dark on the other, and it falls into the tray with a faint papery rustle, lighter than the flint flakes. The leather pad is now dusted with a fine, pale powder that has accumulated during the breaking, a mixture of crushed cortex and microscopic flint splinters, and the powder is so fine that it floats up into the air when disturbed, joining the dust motes in the shaft of light, adding to the slow, drifting haze that fills the room. The napper does not mind the dust. It is a part of the work, as inseparable from the shaping of flints as sawdust is from the sawing of wood, and he has breathed it for so many years that his lungs have learned to accept it, to filter it out without complaint. The hammerstone resumes its steady arc, and more flakes fall, and the core grows smaller and more refined, its shape approaching something like a polyhedron, a faceted lump of dark stone with one flat face and several angled sides that meet at clean, sharp edges. The napper rotates the core frequently now, examining each new face as it is exposed, looking for the natural ridges and planes that will guide the next series of strikes, and his movements are so economical, so free of any wasted energy, that they seem to be happening in slow motion, though they are not slow, merely unhurried, deliberate, perfect. The flint flakes that fall are becoming thinner and more regular, for the napper is now working closer to the heart of the nodule, where the stone is most homogeneous and the fracture patterns are most predictable, and the flakes ring against the tray with a higher, clearer note, a musical tinkling that rises above the deeper thud of the hammerstone, and then fades into the quiet. You lose track of the number of blows, because the act of counting would require a kind of attention that you no longer possess, an attention that has been smoothed out of you by the steady, unwearying rhythm of the work. The core turns, the hammer falls, the flake separates and drops, and the sequence repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats, and each repetition is identical to the last in its essence but slightly different in its details, so that you are never bored, only lulled, only drawn deeper into a state of quiet, passive observation that is almost indistinguishable from dreaming. The napper's hands move through their familiar ancient motions, and you think of all the hands that have moved in this same way, in this same place, shaping flint for the same purpose, and the chain of hands stretches back into the deep past, back to the first flint nappers who sat at the mouths of caves and struck one stone against another and discovered the sharp edge that would change everything. The hands of the brand nappers are the latest link in that chain, but they move in the same way, guided by the same laws of fracture, producing the same clean, ringing sound. After a time that may be a quarter of an hour or maybe an hour, for time has become as soft and formless as the dust in the air, the napper sets the hammerstone down on the bench with a gentle, definitive thud, and the breaking phase is complete. The core that remains is a neat, compact lump of pure flint, stripped of most of its cortex, faceted into a shape that is ready for the next stage of work. It sits on the leather pad like a dark, polished egg, still warm from the napper's hand, and it seems to radiate a quiet satisfaction, a sense of having fulfilled its first purpose. The tray beneath the bench is half full of flakes, and they shimmer in the light like a treasure of discarded night, and the napper rests his hands on his knees for a moment, the fingers relaxing after their long grip, the shoulders settling slightly. The pause is not a break, but a transition, a breath drawn between two movements of a symphony, and you know that soon he will pick up the amplitine and begin the fine work, the patient edging that will turn this faceted lump into a gun, flint sharp enough to strike a spark from a musket lock. But for now, there is only the quiet, only the settling dust, only the grey light falling through the window onto the scarred bench and the waiting tools. And the core rests on the leather pad like a promise that will be kept in the fullness of the morning, unhurried, inevitable, calm. The hammerstone is set aside now, placed back in its accustomed spot on the bench with a soft, heavy thud that resonates faintly through the wood, and the napper's right hand opens and closes, once, twice, a small flexing motion that resettles the fingers after their long grip on the stone. The core of dark flint rests on the leather pad, stripped of most of its cortex and faceted into a shape that is almost ready. A compact lump of glossy stone that gleams in the window light with a deep, wet-looking luster. The breaking phase is complete, and now the napper reaches for the antler tine that lies in the center of the bench. The slender, slightly curved piece of red deer antler with the tip worn to a blunt, polished point and the base wrapped in leather darkened by years of handling. He picks it up with the same unthinking ease, the same perfect economy of movement, and his fingers settle into the grip as if the tine is an extension of his hand, a long, hard finger that has learned over decades exactly how much pressure to apply and at what angle and for how long. From the tray beneath the bench, the napper selects one of the larger flakes that fell during the breaking, a roughly trapezoidal piece of flint about 2 inches long and an inch wide, its edges sharp and irregular, its surface marked by the gentle rippling curves of the fracture. This flake is not the final blank but is close to it, a piece that has the right general shape and thickness, and it will now be refined, edged, and squared until it meets the precise specifications of a gun flint, ready for the jaws of a musket lock. He holds the flake up to the window light, turning it slowly between thumb and forefinger, and the light shines through the thinner edges with that same faint amber translucence, revealing the internal quality of the stone, the absence of cracks or inclusions, the homogeneous darkness that promises a clean, sharp edge. The flake is good, and he lowers it to the leather pad and settles it against the iron stake that is fixed into the bench before him. The iron stake is a simple piece of blacksmithing, a short bar of metal, driven into a hole in the bench wood and secured with a wedge, its upper end flattened and notched with a V-shaped groove that has been burnished to a silvery shine by the edges of thousands of flints. The napper braces the flake against this notch, holding it firmly with the fingers of his left hand, the thumb pressing down on the top edge to keep it steady. The flake angled so that the edge to be worked projects slightly beyond the iron, exposed and ready. The antler tine is in his right hand, and he brings the tip of it to the edge of the flake with a slow, deliberate precision, positioning it at a point where a tiny, almost invisible irregularity marks the line where the flake should be removed. The point of contact is so small that you can barely see it, just the dark tip of the tine touching the dark edge of the flint, and for a moment nothing happens, the pressure building so gradually that there is no visible movement, no sign of the force that is gathering in the napper's wrist and forearm. Then he applies a short, sharp push, a quick flexion of the wrist that drives the tine downward and slightly outward, and a tiny flake of flint detaches from the edge with a small, crisp sound, a sound that is higher and cleaner than the damp crack of the hammerstone, more like the snap of a dry twig or the click of a closing latch. The flake is a half-moon of dark stone no bigger than a fingernail clipping, and it falls into the tray with a faint, musical tinkle, joining the larger waste flakes from the breaking. The napper lifts the tine, examines the edge he has just created, and then shifts his grip on the flake slightly, rotating it a fraction of an inch so that the next point on the edge is brought into contact with the tine. He applies the pressure again, the same short, sharp push, and another tiny flake separates and falls, and the edge grows a little straighter, a little more defined. The rhythm of this fine work is different from the rhythm of the breaking, quicker and lighter, a series of small, precise movements that follow each other in a steady, unvarying sequence, each one a tiny, perfect act of subtraction that removes everything that is not part of the gunflint. The flake in his hand is gradually taking on the shape of the finished flint, and you watch this transformation from your stool in the corner, your head slightly tilted, your breathing slow and deep. The shape that is emerging is a rectangle with one sharp leading edge, a flat back, and squared sides, the classic form of a gunflint that will fit into the cock of a Brown Bess musket and strike a shower of sparks from the steel frizzen when the trigger is pulled. The napper works from left to right along the edge of the blank, then turns it and works the opposing side, and his movements are so practiced that they seem to require no thought at all, the antler tine moving along the edge like a seamstress's needle, each tiny flake removed exactly where it needs to be removed, each adjustment of the angle made without hesitation or doubt. The edge grows sharper and more uniform with every pass of the tine, the tiny scalloped marks of the flake removals forming a neat, regular pattern that catches the light and gleams like a row of miniature crescent moons. The napper pauses after every few flakes to hold the blank up to the window light, sighting along the edge with one eye half closed, checking for any slight curve or irregularity that might prevent the flint from seating properly in the musket lock. The edge must be perfectly straight or nearly so, with a slight bevel on one face, a shallow sloping surface that will help to direct the spark downward into the priming pan. He runs the pad of his thumb very lightly along the edge, feeling the texture, the tiny serrations that the antler tine has left, and the touch is so gentle that you can see the skin of his thumb barely indent against the sharpness. A test of keenness that is also a test of straightness. Finding a small irregularity, a tiny bump where the edge deviates from the true line by a fraction of a millimeter, he brings the tine to it and applies another short, sharp push, and the bump is removed, the flake falling away into the tray, and the edge is true once more. The antler tine makes a soft, dry sound as it works, a sound that is somewhere between a scrape and a tap, a light, percussive note that is fainter than the hammerstone but more distinct, more individual, each flake removal having its own particular pitch and duration. You listen to this sound as it repeats, over and over, and it becomes a kind of soft ticking in the background of your awareness, a quiet, regular pulse that measures the passage of the minutes without urgency or haste. The blank turns in the napper's fingers, the tine presses and releases, and the edge grows longer and cleaner, the rough, irregular margin of the original flake being slowly, patiently transformed into a precise, ruled line that looks as if it were drawn with a straight edge rather than formed by the impact of antler on stone. The napper's breathing is slow and even, his shoulders relaxed, his whole body settled into the work as if into a comfortable chair, and his face is still calm, still without expression. A face that is simply watching and feeling and guiding, nothing more. The finished gun flints that will eventually come from this process must all be within a certain range of size and shape, for the locks of the Brown Bess muskets are made to a standard pattern, and a flint that is too thick will not fit into the cock, and a flint that is too narrow will slip sideways and strike the frizzen at the wrong angle. The napper knows these dimensions not as numbers written on a card, but as a kind of bodily knowledge, a sense of rightness that lives in his fingers, and he checks the blank frequently against this internal template, holding it between thumb and forefinger, turning it over, feeling its thickness and width, and the squareness of its sides. No ruler is used, no calipers, no measuring instrument of any kind, for the napper's hands are the only gauge he needs, calibrated by the shaping of countless flints, and they can detect a deviation of 1/100th of an inch without any conscious effort, the same way a musician can hear a note that is slightly flat. The blank in his hand is approaching this perfect standard, and as it does, his movements become even finer, even more precise. The flakes he removes becoming smaller and smaller, the adjustments subtler, the pauses between them longer as he considers the shape and finds it nearly done. You shift slightly on your stool, your weight settling more deeply into the worn, wooden seat, and the stool gives a faint creak that blends with the sounds of the workshop and disturbs nothing. Your eyelids are heavy, so heavy that keeping them open requires a kind of gentle effort. A small, constant reminder to yourself not to let them close entirely, and the scene before you has taken on the quality of something seen through water, soft and slightly wavering, the edges of things blurring into the warm, dim air. The napper's hands move through their slow, careful dance, the antler tine dipping and pressing, and the blank turns and turns, and the light from the window shifts another imperceptible degree across the bench, and the dust motes continue their endless, aimless drift. The world outside the workshop has faded to a distant murmur, a faint, irrelevant hum that has no power to disturb the deep, settled quiet of the room, and you are aware of nothing but the soft ticking of the tine, and the slow, steady breathing of the man at the bench. The napper now turns his attention to the back of the blank, the flat edge that will sit against the corkscrew of the musket lock. And this edge must be shaped differently from the leading edge, must be blunt and square and slightly thicker, so that it can be gripped firmly and will not crumble under the pressure of the screw. He shifts the blank in his grip, bracing the back edge against the iron stake, and uses the antler tine to remove a series of very small flakes from the corners, squaring them off, creating a neat 90-degree angle where the back meets the sides. The flakes that fall from this part of the work are tiny, almost microscopic, and they drop into the tray with a sound that is more of a whisper than a tinkle, a faint, sandy rustle that is barely audible, even in the quiet of the room. The napper works his way along the back edge, checking the squareness with his thumb after each flake removal, and the process is slow and methodical, the same careful attention given to this unseen part of the flint as to the sharp, visible edge that will strike the spark. When the back edge is finished, the napper sets the antler tine down on the bench for a moment and picks up the shaped blank, holding it in the palm of his left hand and looking at it for a long, quiet moment. The gunflint is nearly complete, a neat, grey-black rectangle of stone with one razor-sharp edge and one flat, square back. The sides parallel and true, the faces smooth and slightly rippled with the conchoidal curves of the fracture. It is a small, modest object, no bigger than the last joint of a man's thumb, and yet it holds within it the potential for fire, for the spark that will ignite the priming powder, that will ignite the main charge that will send a musket ball flying across a battlefield. But here in the workshop, there is no battlefield, no musket, no war. There is only this quiet, patient shaping, this slow reduction of a raw nodule to a finished tool, and the flint sits in the napper's palm like a dark, perfect jewel, heavy for its size, cool and smooth and sharp. The napper places the finished gun flint on the folded piece of canvas that lies at the far end of the bench, next to the row of other finished flints that have been completed since the morning began, and he arranges it carefully so that it sits in line with its fellows, the sharp edges all facing the same direction, the backs all aligned. There are now several of them, 5 or 6 perhaps, and they gleam on the canvas with a soft, dark luster, a small, growing army of identical shapes that will soon be wrapped and crated and sent away to the tower armory. The napper brushes a few stray crumbs of flint from his leather pad into the tray with a sweep of his hand, and the motion is slow and casual, a quiet bit of housekeeping that keeps the work area clean and ready for the next blank. And then he reaches down into the tray and selects another flake from the breaking, a rough, dark piece that will become the next gunflint in the long, slow procession of the day. The antler tine is taken up again, the new flake is braced against the iron stake, and the rhythm resumes, the soft, steady tap, tap, tap of pressure, flaking that has been the heartbeat of the workshop since the first nodule was split open in the early grey light of the morning. You settle more deeply onto your stool, your chin sinking slightly toward your chest, your hams resting open and slack on your thighs, and you let the sound wash over you, a calm, ceaseless tide of small, precise noises that asks nothing of you, expects nothing, requires no thought or response or even wakefulness. The napper works on, unhurried, unceasing, and the gunflints accumulate on the canvas one by one, each one a small, perfect pause in the long, quiet song of the day. The napper settles now into the long, steady rhythm that belongs to the shaping of the edge, a rhythm that is slightly different from the breaking of the nodule, lighter and quicker and more delicate, a rhythm of small, precise pressures rather than heavy blows, and once it begins it continues without variation, without pause, without any sign of hurry or fatigue. He has picked up the antler tine from its place on the bench, and he holds it in his right hand with the same easy familiarity with which he held the hammerstone, the thumb braced against the leather-wrapped base, the tip angled downward toward the flint blank that rests against the notched iron stake. The blank is a rough trapezoid of dark flint, already shaped by the earlier stages of work into something that approximates the final form of a gunflint, and the napper begins to work along its front edge, the edge that will strike the steel frizzen and produce the spark. And this edge must be perfectly straight, perfectly uniform, with a slight bevel on one face that will give it the correct angle of impact. The first pressure flake is removed with a short, sharp push of the antler tine against the very edge of the blank, the tip finding a tiny platform and applying force exactly along the line where the stone wants to fracture, and a half-moon sliver of flint attaches and falls into the tray with a sound so small it is barely a sound, a tick rather than a tap, a sound like a fingernail flicking a piece of paper. The napper shifts the blank a fraction of an inch, repositioning it against the iron stake so that the next spot along the edge is presented to the tine, and he applies another push, and another sliver falls, and the sequence repeats, each removal taking only a second, the tine moving in and out with a mechanical, bird-like precision that seems to belong to a different order of time from the heavy, deliberate breaking of the nodule. The rhythm of the pressure flaking is faster than the rhythm of the hammerstone, but it is still slow, still measured, still calm, for the napper does not hurry and does not allow his hands to move any faster than his attention can follow, and each flake is a deliberate, considered act, a tiny decision made and executed and then followed by another. The edge of the blank is irregular at first, a wavy line of small projections and hollows left by the earlier shaping, and the napper works along it from left to right, taking off the high spots one by one, and the edge begins to straighten under his touch, the waviness smoothing out into a continuous, level line. The sound of the pressure flaking is a soft, regular tick, tick, tick that fills the workshop with a gentle, percussive whisper, and this sound is so consistent, so perfectly spaced, that it becomes a kind of clock, a timekeeper, made of ampler and flint, marking the passage of the morning in tiny, identical increments. You listen to this sound from your stool in the corner, and it seems to enter your body at some point behind your ears and travel down your spine, loosening the small muscles of your neck and shoulders, and your head nods slightly forward, your chin approaching your chest, before you rouse yourself gently and straighten again, and then the sound reclaims you, and your head drifts downward once more. The napper works along the entire length of the edge, reaching the far right corner, and then he turns the blank over and works the other face, removing flakes from the opposite side to create the slight bevel that will make the edge sharp and durable. The bevel is a shallow angle, barely visible to the eye, but it is essential to the function of the gunflint, for it determines the angle at which the edge strikes the steel and the quality of the spark that results, and the napper forms it with the same unhurried attention that he gives to every other part of the work, feeling the angle with the tips of his fingers rather than measuring it, relying on a sense that has been trained by the repetition of this same act over thousands of flints. His left thumb rests on the flat back of the blank, steadying it against the iron, and his right hand works the tine, and the two hands move together in a small, contained dance that has no wasted motion, no unnecessary shift of position, each finger doing exactly what it needs to do and nothing more. The light from the window falls across the bench at an angle that has shifted slightly since you last noticed it, the shaft of morning sun creeping across the scarred wood in a slow, golden tide, and it catches the edge of the flint blank and makes it glister, a thin line of silver fire that runs from one corner to the other. The napper holds the blank up to the window every few minutes, lifting it between thumb and forefinger and sighting along the edge against the pale grey sky outside, checking the straightness of the line, looking for the tiny irregularities that his fingers might have missed. But his eyes will find. This checking is done without haste, the blank held steady at eye level, the napper's head tilting slightly to one side, and the light shines through the thinner parts of the flint with a faint brownish translucence, revealing the internal structure of the stone and any hidden flaws that might cause the edge to crumble under use. Finding a small irregularity, the napper lowers the blank back to the iron stake and applies 2 more pressure flakes, one on each face, and the irregularity disappears, and the edge is true again, and the checking is complete and the work resumes. You notice how the napper's pace remains perfectly constant, how he does not speed up or slow down, regardless of whether the flake removes a large piece or a small one, regardless of whether the edge is being stubborn or cooperative. The rhythm is the same at the beginning of the edge as it is at the middle, the same when the light is bright as when a cloud passes over the sun and dims the room for a moment, the same when the blackbird outside sings and when it falls silent. This constancy is not a matter of discipline or effort, but the natural outcome of long practice, the body finding the pace that it can sustain for hours without wearying, and the napper's hands move in that pace as a river moves in its bed, following the contours of the work without deviation. The tick, tick, tick of the antler tine becomes a feature of the room, as permanent and reassuring as the creak of the beams or the hiss of the embers, and you stop noticing it as a sound and start feeling it as a presence, a steady, rhythmic pressure in the air that holds you gently in place. The flint's blank is slowly transformed under this constant attention, the rough trapezoid becoming a neat, rectangular piece with crisp corners and a clean, straight leading edge, the back left flat and thick for seating in the musket lock, the the sides squared off so that the flint will fit snugly between the jaws of the cock. The dimensions are not large. The finished gun flint will be about 1.25 inches long, 1 inch wide, and perhaps 1/4 inch thick, and the napper checks these dimensions with his fingers alone, spanning the width with his thumb and forefinger, feeling the thickness with his thumb and forefinger, feeling the thickness with a gentle pinch, never reaching for a ruler or a gauge, for his hands are the only measure he needs. A gun flint that is too thick will not fit the lock properly, and one that is too thin will snap under the pressure of the cock, and one that is too short will slip in the jaws, and one that is too long will protrude too far and catch on the frizzen. And all of these tolerances are known to the napper's fingers as intimately as the shape of his own hands. The tray continues to fill with the tiny, delicate waste flakes of the pressure flaking, the half-moons and slivers that collect in a shallow drift of pale grey and dark grey, and these flakes are different from the larger waste of the breaking phase, finer and more regular, each one a near-perfect replica of the edge it was removed from, a tiny mirror of the work. Some of them are so thin that they are translucent, and when the light catches them they glow like fragments of stained glass, deep amber or smoky brown, and they ring against the tray with a high, glassy tinkle that hangs in the air for a moment before fading. The napper pays no attention to the waste. His eyes are on the blank and on the edge, and on the tiny, precise movements of his own hands, and the tray fills slowly, inexorably, a quiet accumulator of the morning's labour. After each edge is finished, the napper sets the completed gun flint on the folded piece of canvas that lies at the back of the bench, and the canvas now holds a growing row of finished flints, each one a dark, neat rectangle of polished stone, identical in function and similar in shape, but each one subtly unique, with its own slight variation in colour and thickness, and the particular pattern of the flake scars that cover its surface. The row of flints is perhaps 8 or 9 now, and it stretches across the canvas in a tidy line. The flints spaced evenly apart, their leading edges aligned, their flat backs resting on the coarse fabric. The canvas itself is a piece of old sailcloth, heavy and stiff, stained with flint dust and darkened at the edges from handling, and it serves both as a work surface for the finely finishing and as a wrapper for the finished flints when they are ready to be bundled and shipped. The flints on the canvas gleam dully in the window light, and they seem to have a presence that is more than the sum of their parts, a collective stillness that speaks of the patience that went into their making. The morning moves toward noon, though you would not know it from anything inside the workshop, for the light changes so slowly and the rhythm of the work is so unwavering that time seems to have become a fluid, formless thing, a medium through which the napper moves rather than a sequence of hours to be measured. The only marker of the passage of time is the growing row of finished flints on the canvas and the diminishing size of the working pile of blanks on the left side of the bench, the pile that was a small mountain at the start of the day and is now a low hill, each blank taken up and worked and placed on the canvas in its turn. The napper reaches for a new blank from the pile, his hand moving to the left without his eyes leaving the bench, and his fingers close on a fresh trapezoid of dark flint, and he brings it to the iron stake and settles it into the notch and begins the tick, tick, tick of the edging once more. The sound of the pressure flaking blends with the other sounds of the workshop into a single, continuous texture, a fabric woven from many threads, the tick of the ampler tine, the soft hiss of the embers, the distant murmur of the wind in the thatch, the occasional creak of a beam settling, and beneath it all, the deep, abiding silence that is the true ground of the room. There is no separation between these sounds, no sharp boundary where one ends and another begins. They flow together into a single, gentle stream of auditory calm, and you let yourself be carried by it, your thoughts growing slow and diffuse, your body heavy on the stool, your hands slack and still. The napper's shoulders move slightly as he works, a small repetitive motion that is barely visible, and his breathing is so slow and regular that it is almost imperceptible, the smock rising and falling with a rhythm that matches the tick of the tine, and you find your own breathing settling into the same pattern. The same slow, steady cycle of rise and fall, in and out. The edge of the new blank is more irregular than the last, with a pronounced hollow on one side that will require extra care to straighten, and the napper works the tine into the hollow with a series of short, precise pushes that remove tiny flakes from the sides, gradually reducing the depth of the depression until the line of the edge runs straight from corner to corner. He does not press harder or faster when the work is more demanding. His pace remains the same, the tine moving with the same light, dancing touch, and the flakes fall with the same small, musical sound. The difficulty of the edge does not seem to register on his face, which remains calm and withdrawn, the eyes half-lidded, the mouth relaxed, and you wonder if he even perceives difficulty in the way that other people do, or if the concept has been worn away by years of repetition until only the work remains, pure and simple and effortless, without any quality of ease or hardship, just the thing itself, the stone and the tool and the hand. The napper holds the blank up to the window again, checking the edge, and the light catches a slight burr on one corner, a tiny projection that escaped the earlier flaking, and he brings the blank down and removes it with 2 quick, deft touches of the tine, and then the edge is perfect, and he sets the finished flint on the canvas next to its fellows. The row now contains 10 flints, and the napper pauses for a moment to count them with a quiet murmur, his lips moving slightly, and then he reaches for another blank. The pause is brief, a few seconds at most, but it serves as a kind of punctuation, a comma in the long sentence of the morning, and then the tick-tick-tick resumes, and the sentence continues, and the day flows on, toward its quiet, unseen conclusion. The folded canvas on the bench now holds a row of finished gunflints that stretches from the iron stake almost to the far edge, a neat, orderly line of dark rectangles that gleam softly in the window light with the quiet luster of polished stone. There are a dozen of them at this moment, perhaps a few more, each one a small, precise achievement of hand and eye, each one identical in its purpose and similar in its shape, but each one subtly individual, bearing the particular marks of the flake removals that shaped it, the tiny scalloped scars that cover the faces like a script too fine to read. The napper has arranged them with a careful, unthinking precision, the leading edges all facing the same direction, the flat backs aligned, a small gap left between each flint so that they do not touch and chip one another, and the whole row has the quiet, satisfied look of a task well begun and steadily continued. The canvas itself is a piece of heavy sailcloth, stiffened with age and use, its surface darkened in places by the oils of the napper's hands and dusted with a fine pale bloom of flint powder that has worked itself into the fibers, and it lies on the bench like a small island of order, amidst the scatter of tools and the slowly growing mound of waste in the tray. You let your gaze rest on this row of flints, and the sight of them is calming in a way that is hard to define, a visual equivalent of the slow, steady rhythm that has been sounding in the workshop since the morning began. A rhythm that is now so deeply woven into the air that it seems to be a part of the building itself, as natural and unobtrusive as the breathing of the beams. Each flint represents a certain amount of time, you realize, a certain quantity of careful, unhurried attention, and when you look at the row you are looking at an hour or so of the napper's life, an hour that has been distilled into these dark, sharp-edged shapes. An hour that has been distilled into these dark, sharp-edged shapes. An hour that has passed in a soft haze of ticking sounds and drifting dust and the slow golden crawl of light across the bench. The flints are not beautiful in any dramatic way. They are too small and too plain for that, too purely functional, but they possess the quiet beauty of things that have been made, well, made carefully, made without haste or waste, and they sit on the canvas with a patient, waiting air, as if they know that their work has only just begun, and that they will one day be taken from this quiet room and carried far away to places the napper has never seen and will never see. The napper pauses in his work now, setting down the antler tine on the bench with a small, precise click, and the sudden cessation of the ticking sound leaves a gap in the air, a pocket of silence that fills slowly with the other, softer sounds of the room, the whisper of the embers, the distant trickle of the river beyond the lane, the faint creak of a beam settling somewhere in the thatch. He stretches his fingers slowly, opening and closing his right hand to ease the muscles that have been gripping the tine for the past hour, and the motion is slow and deliberate, a small, private gesture of maintenance that is performed without thought, the way a cat stretches after a long sleep. His left hand rests on the bench, the fingers curled loosely, and for a moment he simply sits there, his gaze moving over the row of finished flints with a quiet, assessing eye, counting them perhaps, or checking their quality, or simply letting his attention rest on the fruits of the morning's labor before returning to the work that remains. After this brief pause, the napper reaches for the folded canvas and lifts its far edge carefully, bringing the row of flints closer to him, and he begins to count them in a low murmur. His lips moving slightly, his finger hovering above each flint in turn, but not touching it, as if the counting is a small ritual that must be performed exactly so. The count goes to 12, and then he picks up a 13th flint from the working area, the one he has just finished edging, and he places it at the end of the row, aligning it with the others, adjusting its position with a gentle, precise nudge of his fingertip until it sits exactly in line. The row is now 13 flints long, a baker's dozen of grey-black stone, and the napper nods to himself. A slow, almost imperceptible dip of the chin, as if the number has some small significance that only he understands. A milestone on the long, slow road toward the day's total. Behind the napper, on a low shelf fixed to the wall above the small hearth, sits an open ledger, and your gaze drifts to it now, drawn by its stillness and by the way the firelight from the embers catches the edges of its pages and gives them a faint, warm glow. The ledger is a substantial book, bound in plain brown leather that is cracked and worn at the corners, and it lies open at a page that is about 2/3 of the way through, the spine creased from being laid flat, the pages slightly wavy from the damp air of the workshop. You can see, even from your stool in the corner, that the pages are ruled with faint, faded lines and filled with neat, careful handwriting, in a dark brown ink, columns of numbers and dates, and brief descriptions that record the output of the workshop over many months and many thousands of flints. The ledger is a quiet, unassuming object, but it holds within it the whole history of the napper's labor, every nodule broken, every flake removed, every gunflint shaped and sent away, all of it reduced to columns of figures that march down the page in orderly rows. The napper rises from his stool now, a slow, careful movement that is not a stretch, but simply a change of position, and he walks the few steps to the shelf, his footsteps soft on the packed earth floor, and he leans over the ledger, taking up a small stub of a pencil that lies in the crease of the book. The pencil is worn down to a short length, its end chewed slightly from long habit, and the napper wets the tip with his tongue, a tiny, automatic gesture, and then he writes something in the ledger, a single line of figures that you cannot read from where you sit, the pencil moving across the page with a faint, scratching sound that is the only new sound in the room. The entry takes only a moment, the numbers written in the same neat, unhurried hand that fills all the other pages, and then the napper returns the pencil to the crease, straightens up, and looks at the page for a long, quiet moment, his eyes moving down the columns as if he is checking something, comparing the morning's tally to the requirement, measuring his progress against the long, slow arc of the order. The order, as you have gathered from the quiet murmur of the workshop and from the glimpses of the ledger that you have caught throughout the morning, is a large one, placed by the Board of Ordnance, for 12,000 gunflints to be delivered to the Tower Armory by midsummer, or perhaps by Michaelmas, for the contracts are often flexible, and the clerks in London understand that the nappers of Brandon work to a rhythm that cannot be hurried. The number 12,000 is a vast figure when you consider it in the abstract, a mountain of flints that would fill a cart to overflowing. But here in the workshop, it is broken down into smaller, manageable portions, into daily tallies and weekly targets, and each finished flint that is laid on the canvas is one small, steady step toward the fulfillment of the order. The napper thinks of the order not as a great looming obligation, but as a simple, patient fact, a number that will eventually be reached if he continues to do today what he did yesterday and the day before, and the ledger is the record of that slow, steady accumulation, the proof that the work is being done and will continue to be done until the required quantity is met. The ledger page is headed with a date, written in the same careful hand, and beneath it are columns labelled with small precise abbreviations that you can just make out from your seat, the date of each working day, the number of raw nodules taken from the store, the number of blanks struck, the number of blanks struck, the number of finished flints produced, the number of flawed pieces discarded, and a final column for the running total of flints delivered to the tower. The numbers are not large for any single day, for a single napper working alone can produce only so many flints in the hours of daylight, and the pace is slow and methodical, a pace that is sustainable over weeks and months, rather than a frantic burst that would lead to mistakes and waste. The daily tallies are modest, perhaps 50 or 60 flints on a good day, fewer if the nodules are stubborn or the light is poor, and these modest tallies are added together day after day, week after week, until the mountain of 12,000 is gradually reduced to a hill, and then to a molehill, and then to nothing, and the order is fulfilled, and the new order is placed, and the ledger continues. The napper closes the ledger gently, the heavy cover dropping onto the pages with a soft dusty thud, and he turns back toward the bench, his face still calm, his movements still unhurried, and he settles onto his stool once more, the wooden legs creaking in their familiar way, the leather knee pad shifting as he adjusts his position. The pause has been a brief one, a small island of stillness in the slow river of the day, and now the current resumes, the napper's hands reaching for the antler tine and another rough blank from the pile on the bench, and the tick-tick-tick of the pressure flaking begins again, soft and steady, a sound that has become so familiar by now that you barely notice it the way you barely notice its sound of your own breathing. Your gaze returns to the folded canvas and the row of finished flints, and you find yourself counting them again, not with any purpose but simply because the act of counting is a small, soothing occupation, a way of anchoring your attention in the quiet of the room. From left to right they lie, 13 dark rectangles, and each one has a slight variation in color. Some a deep, glossy black like polished jet, others a lighter gray with a faint, milky translucence at the edges, still others of brownish black with tiny, almost invisible flecks of lighter mineral that catch the light and glimmer for a moment before fading. The flake scars that cover the faces form a pattern that is unique to each flint, a kind of accidental calligraphy that records the sequence of removals that shaped it, and the leading edges are sharp and clean, with a slight, silvery gleam where the light strikes them at the right angle. The napper has tested each edge with his thumb, a gentle, feather-light touch that assesses the sharpness without drawing blood, and the edges are keen enough to shave a hair, keen enough to bite into the hard steel of a musket frizzen and tear away a shower of sparks, and yet here they sit on a piece of old sailcloth, quiet and still, waiting. The canvas is not the final resting place for the flints, for when the day's work is done, the row will be wrapped up into a neat bundle and placed in a larger crate that stands by the door, a crate of rough-sawn elm boards nailed together with iron nails, its interior lined with straw to cushion the flints and prevent them from chipping one another in transit. The crate is already partly filled, for the napper has been working on this order for several weeks now, and the bundles of flints that lie inside it represent the accumulated labor of many quiet mornings like this one, many hours of patient tapping and shaping, many trays of discarded waste flakes tipped into the pothole bin. The straw that pads the crate is dry and golden, smelling faintly of the field it came from, and it rustles softly when the bundles are added. A dry, papery sound that is one more thread in the fabric of the workshop's quiet. When the crate is full, it will be nailed shut and loaded onto a cart, and the cart will trundle away down the lane toward the London road, and the flints will travel for days, passing through towns and villages and open country, until they reach the grey, sprawling bulk of the Tower Armoury, where they will be unpacked and counted and stored in great wooden bins, ready to be issued to the regiments when the peace breaks and the war resumes. But that is all in the future, a future that seems very far away from the quiet of the workshop, and for now, the flints remain on the canvas, and the crate remains half full by the door, and the napper remains on his stool, working his way through the pile of blanks with a patience that seems to have no limit. You imagine the journey that the flints will take, the cart rattling over rutted roads, the driver dozing on his seat, the flints jostling gently in their bed of straw, and the image is a peaceful one, a slow, sleepy progression through a landscape of fields and hedgerows and small, quiet villages, and it seems like a natural continuation of the journey that the flints have already made, from the chalk pit to the workspace to the crate, a journey that is measured not in miles but in hours of careful attention. Each quite. The napper glances up at the window, and his gaze passes across the row of finished flints, and something in his expression shifts very slightly, a tiny tightening at the corners of his eyes that might be satisfaction, or might be simply the recognition that the morning's work is progressing as it should. He reaches out and straightens one of the flints on the canvas, nudging it back into alignment with its neighbors, and the gesture is so gentle, so precise, that it seems almost tender. The touch of a craftsman who respects even the smallest and most modest of his creations. Then his hand withdraws, and the time resumes its work, and the tick, tick, tick fills the room once more, and the row of flints continues to grow, one by one, a slow, steady accumulation that is as natural and inevitable as the falling of leaves or the turning of the tide. You let your eyes close for a moment, just a moment, the weight of your eyelids too great to resist any longer. And when you open them again, the light has shifted slightly, and there is a new flint on the canvas, a 14th now, placed neatly at the end of the row, its sharp edge aligned with the others, its dark surface still warm from the knapper's hand. The ledger sits closed on its shelf, the numbers sleeping inside their columns, and the crate by the door waits in patient silence, and the knapper works on, and the morning deepens toward noon, and the world outside the window goes about its quiet, unseen business, the river flowing, the clouds drifting, the blackbird singing its indefinite song, and all of it is held in the same deep, peaceful stillness that fills the workshop and fills you, a candle-binds unfolded piece of canvas, white and micast of skip wife. I'd have a touch for head alter meditated and running white late. The sun has moved across the window now, travelling its slow, imperceptible arc through the grey spring sky, and the quality of light inside the workshop has changed in ways that are subtle but unmistakable. The way the light in a room changes when a door is quietly closed or a curtain is drawn halfway. The morning light was cool and slightly green, filtered through the thick bubbled glass with a pale underwater quality that made the shadows soft and the highlights muted. But now the light is warmer, more amber, carrying a faint, honeyed tone that speaks of the sun having climbed past its zenith and begun its long, slow descent toward the western horizon. The shaft of light that falls through the window no longer strikes the bench at the shallow, slanting angle it held in the early hours. It has moved across the scarred wood, travelling a distance of perhaps a foot since you first sat down on your stool, and now it illuminates a different part of the bench, catching the iron stake with a dull, ruddy gleam and throwing the shadow of the antler tine across the canvas in a long, dark line that shifts almost imperceptibly as the minutes pass. The knapper works on through this changing light without any sign that he notices the shift, his hands moving in their steady, unhurried rhythm, the antler tine pressing and releasing, the tiny flakes falling into the tray with their small musical sounds. He has been working for hours now, since the early grey of the morning, when the mist still hung over the river and the blackbird had not yet begun to sing, and in all that time he has not paused for rest or for food, has not risen from his stool except to check the ledger, has not allowed his pace to quicken or to slacken, and his concentration remains as complete and as calm as it was when the first nodule was split open. His back is straight, his shoulders relaxed, his head tilted slightly forward to bring his eyes closer to the work, and there is no sign of fatigue in his movements, no stiffness in his fingers or heaviness in his arms, for the work is not exhausting in the way that heavy labor is exhausting. It is a slow, steady expenditure of a small amount of energy, sustained over a long period, and the knapper's body has been shaped by years of this same activity until it fits the work as perfectly as palmstone fits his palm. The shadows in the workshop have shifted too, stretching and deepening in the corners of the room where the light does not reach, and the stack of raw nodules against the far wall now stands in a soft, brownish gloom, the chalky cortex of the flints catching only a faint, indirect glow that makes them look like a pile of old bones or a heap of ancient, weathered skulls. The spider web in the corner of the window frame, which was invisible in the morning, now catches the light at an angle that makes it suddenly visible, a delicate, geometric construction of silk that glows like spun gold against the darker wattle and daub behind it, and the spider sits motionless at its center, a tiny, patient bead of darkness that has been there all along, unnoticed. The small fire in the corner hearth has burned down to a bed of glowing embers that shift and settle with a soft, whispering sound, and the occasional pop of a resin pocket in the wood sends up a brief flare of orange light that paints the wall behind the hearth with a flickering momentary warmth before fading back into the steady, dull red glow. Your own body has settled deeply into the stool, your weight finding the hollows that other sitters have worn into the wood over the years, and you feel a pleasant heaviness in your limbs, a sense of being anchored to the earth, held in place by the quiet gravity of the room. The air in the workshop has grown warmer as the day has progressed, the chill of the early morning replaced by a mild, comfortable warmth that comes partly from the sun on the thatch and partly from the steady, radiant heat of the embers, and this warmth wraps around you like a blanket, loosening the small muscles of your face and neck, drawing your eyelids downward with a gentle, insistent pressure. You have long since stopped trying to follow the details of the napper's work, the exact sequence of flakes and turns and checks. Instead, you let the whole scene wash over you as a single, continuous impression, a painting made of light and shadow and soft, repetitive sound, and you are content simply to be here, to be still, to let the afternoon carry you along like a leaf on a slow, deep river. The door of the workshop opens quietly, the wooden latch lifting with a faint, dry click, and a woman steps inside, moving with the same quiet economy that characterizes everything in this place, as if loudness or haste would be a kind of sacrilege against the peace of the room. She is dressed in a simple woolen dress of dark brown, with a white apron tied at her waist and a cloth cap covering her hair, and she carries a brown earthenware mug in one hand, holding it carefully. The steam, rising from its surface in a thin curling ribbon that catches the amber light and glows for a moment before dispersing. The napper does not look up as she enters, does not turn his head or pause in his work, and she does not speak, does not offer any greeting or make any sound beyond the soft scuff of her shoes on the packed earth floor, and her presence in the room is as natural and unobtrusive as the presence of the bench or the stool or the stacks of flint. She sets the mug down on the corner of the bench, at the far end away from the working area, placing it on a small flat piece of slate that serves as a coaster, and the mug makes a soft, hollow sound as it meets the stone, a quiet ceramic thud that is swallowed immediately by the deeper quiet of the room. The steam from the mug rises in a slender, wavering column, carrying the smell of the small beer into the air, a smell that is faintly sweet and faintly bitter, the smell of malted barley and hops and the cool, dark cellar where the barrel is stored, and it mingles with the other smells of the workshop, the flint dust and the leather and the wood smoke, adding a new layer to the intricate, peaceful fragrance of the room. The woman turns and walks back to the door, her footsteps making no more sound than they did on the way in, and she pauses at the threshold for a moment, her hand on the latch, and she glances at the napper, not with any expression of concern or inquiry, but simply with the quiet, familiar look of someone who has performed this same errand 1,000 times, and will perform it 1,000 times more. Then she slips out through the door, pulling it closed behind her with a soft wooden click, and the workshop returns to its previous state, the only trace of her visit, the mug on the bench, and the faint lingering scent of malt, and the slowly dissolving ribbon of steam. The napper continues to work for a while longer, his hands moving through their steady sequence, the tine pressing and releasing, and the mug sits untouched on its slate coaster, the steam thinning and then disappearing altogether as the beer cools to room temperature, and after perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, the napper reaches a natural stopping point, a moment when a flint is finished and placed on the canvas and the next blank has not yet been picked up. He sets the antler tine down on the bench, aligning it with the edge of the wood, and he reaches for the mug with a slow, deliberate movement, his fingers closing around the warm earthenware, and he lifts it to his lips and drinks. He drinks slowly, in small, measured sips, his eyes still on the bench, his attention still somewhere inside the work, and the beer is cool and slightly flat, the way small beer always is, a drink meant for refreshment rather than intoxication. A drink that has been the working man's beverage since the first barley was malted and the first hops were boiled. The mug is a plain, sturdy thing, glazed a dark brown on the inside and left unglazed on the outside, and it has a small chip on the rim that the napper's lower lip avoids without any conscious adjustment, a habit so old that it has become part of the act of drinking. The napper takes his time with the beer, not hurrying but not lingering either, simply drinking at the pace that the moment requires, and when the mug is about half empty, he sets it back on the slate coaster and picks up the antler tine once more, reaching for a new blank from the pile, and the rhythm resumes, the tick-tick filling the room again as if it had never stopped. The interruption has been so brief and so quiet that it barely registers as an interruption. It is simply one more small event in the long, slow flow of the afternoon, a quiet moment of sustenance that has been folded into the work without breaking its continuity. The beer will be finished later, in another pause, or perhaps at the end of the day, and the mug will be taken back to the cottage and washed and filled again tomorrow, and this small cycle will repeat itself day after day, as steady and as reliable as the cycle of the flint from nodule to blank to finished flint. The afternoon deepens, the light growing richer and more golden as the sun slides further toward the west, and the shadows in the workshop lengthen across the floor, stretching from the legs of the bench and the stool and the piles of flint like long dark fingers that creep slowly toward the far wall. The knapper's shadow, which was a short hunched shape on the floor behind him in the morning, is now a long distorted figure that reaches almost to the door, its edges soft and blurred, its darkness broken by the faint, reflected glow of the embers. The dust motes that dance in the shaft of light have thinned somewhat, for the window has been open, a crack, and the air in the room has been slowly circulating, carrying the finest particles out into the yard and bringing in the clean, damp smell of the river and the fields. But enough dust remains to make the shaft of light a visible, golden column that cuts across the dimmer air of the workshop like a beam of amber glass. The knapper works his way through the pile of blanks, and the pile grows smaller, and the row of finished flints on the canvas grows longer, stretching now from one edge of the folded cloth almost to the other. 18 or 20 flints laid out in their neat, orderly line. The canvas will soon need to be cleared, the flints wrapped and bundled and placed in the crate by the door, but the knapper does not rush toward that point. He continues at his steady, unwearying pace, each flint receiving the same careful attention, each edge checked against the window light, each corner squared and each bevel formed with the same precise, patient movements. When he finishes the last blank in the pile, he will not stop but will return to the tray and select the larger flakes from the breaking phase, the ones that were set aside for further working, and he will shape these into additional flints, for the order is large and every usable piece of flint must be transformed into a gunflint before the day is done. Occasionally, the knapper strikes a blank that is flawed, a piece of flint that looked sound on the surface but reveals a hidden crack or a fossil void beneath. And when this happens, the flake crumbles under the pressure of the tine, splitting along the line of weakness rather than along the intended plane, and the knapper sets the ruined piece aside without any sign of frustration or disappointment, dropping it into the bin of scrap that sits beside the tray. The bin is a large, rough basket woven from willow withes, and it is nearly full now, a jumble of grey and black fragments that catch the light in a chaos of angles and edges, a heap of rejected stone that sparkles dully in the amber glow. The scrap will not go to waste, for even the flawed flints have their uses. They will be taken out to the lane and broken into smaller pieces with a heavy mallet, and the fragments will be spread over the ruts and potholes that form in the wet weather, filling them with a hard, durable material that will pack down under the wheels of carts and the hooves of horses until it becomes as solid as the road itself. The flint that was not good enough for a musket lock will find its purpose underfoot, bearing the weight of travellers and their goods, and even in this humble role it will serve for years, for centuries perhaps, for flint is almost indestructible once it is set in the ground, and the potholes of Brandon are filled with the waste of generations of knappers, a deep, compacted layer of discarded stone that underlies the whole village and will remain there long after the workshop has fallen and the last gun flitted struck. You watch the knapper drop another flawed blank into the bin, and the fragment lands with a sharp clattering sound that is louder than the usual sounds of the workshop, a brief, jagged note that breaks the soft continuity of the ticking and then fades, and the bin settles back into stillness, its contents gleaming in the amber light like a hoard of broken jewels. The knapper picks up a fresh blank and the rhythm resumes, the tick-tick-tick smoothing over the interruption, restoring the calm, and your attention drifts back to the window and the light, which is now so warm and golden that it seems almost tangible, a thick honeyed glow that fills the upper part of the room and leaves the lower part in a soft brownish shadow. Outside the workshop, the world goes about its quiet, rural afternoon, and through the thick glass of the window you can hear, very faintly, the distant sounds of the village, a dog barking once and then falling silent, a cart rumbling along a lane somewhere out of sight, the high, thin call of a child that is answered by another child, and then fades. The blackbird has stopped singing, perhaps gone to roost or to feed, and in its place a wood pigeon has begun its soft, repetitive cooing, a sound that is so deeply familiar and so deeply soothing that it seems to be a part of the English afternoon itself, woven into the fabric of the light and the air and the quiet. The pigeon calls 5 times and then stops, and then after a long pause calls 5 times again, and the pattern repeats, as steady in its own way as the ticking of the antler tine, and the 2 rhythms, the indoor and the outdoor, blend together into a single, peaceful counterpoint. The knapper works on, and the afternoon wears on, and the light continues its slow golden decline, and the shadows continue their long creeping advance across the floor, and you feel yourself sinking deeper and deeper into the quiet of the room, your thoughts growing slower and softer until they are no longer thoughts at all, but simply a gentle, drowsy awareness of the warmth and the light, and the steady, lulling sound of the tine against the flint. A sound that has become the whole world, a sound that suggests apt of temperature. By late afternoon, the workshop has settled into a heavy quietude, a stillness so deep and so complete that it seems to have a texture of its own, a soft, muffling weight that presses gently on your ears and makes the world outside seem very far away. The light coming through the window has shifted from the warm, honeyed amber of midday to a deeper, richer gold, the color of ripe wheat or old book pages, and it no longer falls in a distinct, slanting shaft, but has diffused into a general glow that fills the upper part of the room, leaving the corners in a soft, velvety shadow. The dust motes that dance so busily in the morning have mostly settled, their slow, aimless drift coming to an end as the air in the workshop has grown stiller, the crack of the door having been closed, and the draught from the hearth having steadied to a barely perceptible movement of warm air rising toward the thatch. What dust remains hangs suspended in the golden light as a fine, almost invisible haze, a faint bloom that softens the edges of everything and gives the room the look of a painting seen through a thin layer of silk. You become aware, gradually and without any sense of effort, of the particular smells that fill the workshop, smells that have been present all day, but that only now, in the deep quiet of the late afternoon, seem to separate themselves from the general background and present themselves to your attention as distinct, individual presences. The first and most immediate is the dry metallic tang of struck flint, a smell that is unlike anything else in your experience, a smell that is sharp and clean and slightly cold, like the air after a lightning strike, or the scent that rises from a freshly sharpened blade. It comes from the thousands of tiny fractures that have been made in the stone since the morning began, each flake removal exposing a new surface of pure silica to the air, and these surfaces are so fresh, so newly created, that they still carry the faint electrical charge of their separation, a charge that interacts with the moisture in the air to produce that clean, metallic note. The smell is not strong, not overpowering, but is persistent, a thin, bright thread that runs through the heavier, earthier odors of the room, like a silver wire through dark cloth. Beneath the metallic tang lies the dry, chalky scent of the flint dust itself, a smell that is softer and more diffuse, the smell of old stone and powdered earth, the smell that rises from a dry riverbed or a chalk cliff on a hot day. This dust has accumulated everywhere in the workshop over the years, sifting into the cracks of the bench, settling on the blades of the tools, working its way into the fibers of the leather apron and the canvas wraps, and it gives off a constant, gentle fragrance that is the background note of the room, the olfactory equivalent of the steady, low hum of silence. The chalk dust is not unpleasant. It is clean and dry and faintly reminiscent of the open fields and the deep pits where the nodules were quarried, a smell that connects the workshop to the wider landscape of Suffolk, to the chalk downs and the flint seams and the slow geological time that produced the stone. Threaded through these two main scents is the faint, warm smokiness of the small fire that smoulders in the corner grate, a fire that has been burning since the early morning and has now reduced itself to a deep bed of glowing embers that give off very little flame but a steady, gentle heat. The smoke from the fire is not thick or acrid, for the wood is well seasoned and the chimney draws properly, but there is a subtle aromatic quality to it, a hint of the resin and the sap that were once in the wood, and it adds a layer of comfort to the air, a sense of shelter and warmth and quiet domesticity. From time to time, a pocket of trapped moisture in a piece of wood will hiss and pop, releasing a small puff of steam that carries an even sharper, tangier scent. The smell of wet bark and wood sap, and this brief pungent note cuts through the other smells for a moment, and then fades, absorbed back into the general calm. The fourth smell is the clean, warm scent of the leather knee pad and the apron hanging on its peg, a smell that is rich and organic and deeply soothing. The smell of well-cared-for hide that has been shaped and softened by years of contact with human skin. The leather has a faintly animal quality, a reminder of the cow from which it came, but this rawness has been tamed by the oils of the knapper's hands, by the constant friction of the flint, by the dust and the smoke and the slow passage of time, until it has become something else entirely, a smell that is entirely its own, the smell of patience and labor and the steady rhythmic pressure of one thing against another. When the knapper shifts on his stool and the knee pad flexes slightly, a small wave of this leather scent is released into the air, and it mingles with the other smells, adding a note of soft, brown warmth. And finally, just at the edge of perception, there is the faint, clean smell of the small beer that sits in the earthenware mug on the bench, a smell of malt and cool cellars that has faded since the mug was first set down, but has not entirely disappeared, a reminder of the brief, quiet visit that interrupted the afternoon, and of the simple, homely rhythms that sustain the work. All of these smells combine into a single harmonious fragrance that is the smell of the workshop itself, a smell that you've been breathing all day without noticing, but now, in the heavy quietude of the late afternoon, it fills your lungs and your awareness, and you find it deeply, inexplicably comforting, a smell that means safety and stillness and the slow, steady passage of time. The knapper's breathing has become audible now, not because it has changed, but because the silence around it has deepened to such an extent that even the softest sounds become distinct, and you can hear the slow, regular rhythm of his breath as it moves in and out of his chest. A rhythm that is perfectly aligned with the rhythm of his hands, the tick-tick of the antler, time matching the rise and fall of his rib cage. He seems entirely absorbed in the work, his consciousness shrunk down to the small bright point of the edge he is shaping, and yet his body is completely relaxed, his shoulders slack, his spine curved gently forward, his feet flat on the packed earth floor, and the breathing that sustains him is as automatic and as constant as the ticking of a clock. You find your own breathing settling into the same slow pattern, the same deep, even cycle of inhalation and exhalation, and the boundary between your body and the room, between your awareness and the quiet, seems to blur and soften, as if you are becoming a part of the workshop yourself, a part of its stillness and its patience. Your gaze, which has been wandering slowly around the room for hours now, comes to rest on the window and on the spider web that spans the lower corner of the frame, a web that you noticed earlier in the day, but that has, in the intervening hours, been rebuilt and extended. Its delicate architecture now more complex, more finely wrought. The spider sits at its center, a tiny, motionless bead of brown against the pale silk, and the web itself is a marvel of patience, each strand perfectly spaced, each radial line intersecting the spiral at exactly the right angle, the whole construction glistening faintly in the golden light. The spider has been undisturbed all day, its web untouched by the knapper's tools or the woman's broom or the draft from the door, and it has taken advantage of this piece to repair the damage of the previous night, to fill in the gaps torn by a trapped fly or a gust of wind, and now the web is complete, a small, perfect thing in a corner of a small, perfect room, a quiet testament to the value of slow, steady work. Outside the window, the world stirs briefly, and you hear the distant rumble of a cart passing along the lane, the iron-rimmed wheels grinding against the flint gravel, the wooden axles creaking under the weight of whatever load they carry. The sound rises and then falls, swelling as the cart approaches some unseen point on the road, and then fading as it moves away toward the village. And the horses' hooves make a soft, muffled clopping that is almost musical, a slow, four-beat rhythm that blends with the rumble of the wheels. The cart does not stop at the workshop. It continues on its way, carrying its load to some farm or cottage or market, and the sound of it lingers in the air for a moment after it has passed, a fading echo that is swallowed up by the deep, abiding quiet of the room. A dog barks somewhere, a single deep note that carries across the fields, and then falls silent. And the silence that follows is even deeper than before, as if the brief interruption has served only to emphasize the extent of the quiet, to draw attention to the peace that holds the workshop in its gentle, invisible hand. The constant, even sound of the knapping fills your ears like a lullaby, a sound that has been present for so long now that it has ceased to be a sound at all and has become a kind of silence in itself, a steady, rhythmic pressure that pushes against your eardrums in a way that is deeply soothing, deeply soporific. The tick of the antler-tine against the flint is the main note, the beat that carries the rhythm, but beneath it there are other, subtler sounds. The soft, sandy whisper of the flakes falling into the tray, the creak of the stool as the napper shifts his weight, the faint, papery rustle of his sleeve brushing against the bench, the hiss of the embers, the settling of a beam in the thatch. All of these sounds weave together into a single, seamless fabric, a fabric that wraps around you and holds you in a state of pleasant, drifting drowsiness, a state in which the boundaries between waking and sleeping have grown so thin as to be almost invisible. You lose track of the number of flints on the canvas, for counting them would require a focus that you no longer possess, an act of will that feels impossibly distant, and instead you simply let the row of dark, gleaming rectangles blur into a single extended shape, a shape that grows slowly longer as the afternoon wears on, each new flint added to the end, without any ceremony or notice, a quiet, inevitable accumulation. The napper's hands move through their familiar ancient dance, and the work is no longer a sequence of distinct actions, but a single endless peaceful motion. A current that flows through the room and through the man and through you, a current that has been flowing since the first nodule was broken and will continue to flow until the last flake is removed. And then it will stop. But not yet, for the afternoon is still golden, and the quiet is still warm, and the rise time dough, and the ted's brave land of the second could break. The spider in the corner adjusts one of its legs, a movement so tiny that you almost miss it, and the web trembles slightly, a faint, silvery shimmer that passes from the center to the edges and then fades, and then the spider is still again, and the web is still, and the window is still, and the light continues its slow, golden decline, and the napper works on, and you watch, and breathe, and drift. The light fails slowly, then all at once, the way it always does at the end of a winter afternoon, and the golden glow that filled the workshop begins to drain away into a soft grey dimness that creeps in from the corners and rises from the floor like a tide of shadow. The window, which has been a source of changing illumination all day, is now a rectangle of pale silvery grey, the colour of the sky after the sun has dropped below the horizon, but before the first stars appear, and the details of the room that were so clear in the morning and the afternoon have begun to blur and soften, losing their edges, merging into the general dusk. The napper works on, his hands still moving through their steady, unhurried rhythm, but his pace has slowed slightly, the pauses between each pressure flake growing a little longer, for the light is now so dim that he must hold the flint closer to his eyes and turn it more carefully to catch the last faint gleam from the window. The tick-tick-tick of the antler-tine has become quieter, more hesitant, a clock that is running down, and the sound seems to belong to the twilight itself, a sound that is half in the world and half in memory. At last the napper stops, his hands falling still on the bench, and the silence that rushes into the gap left by the cessation of the ticking is immense, a vast, soft emptiness that fills the workshop and your ears and your whole awareness, a silence that has been waiting all day for this moment. The napper holds the half-finished blank up to the window, squinting at it in the grey light, and he can no longer see the edge well enough to work, can no longer distinguish the tiny irregularities that his fingers can feel, but his eyes must confirm, and so he sets the blank down on the bench with a gentle, definitive thud, placing it to one side where it will wait for tomorrow, a small, dark shape in the gathering dusk, a promise that the work will resume when the light returns. The half-finished blank is not alone on the bench. There are two others beside it, blanks that were begun in the last hour of the afternoon and could not be completed before the daylight failed, and they lie in a neat, patient row, their edges partly shaped, their surfaces marked with the beginnings of the flake pattern, and they will be the first flints to be finished in the morning, the bridge between this day and the next. The napper lays down the antler tine, placing it in its accustomed spot on the bench with a small, precise click, and the tool rests there, its polished tip gleaming faintly in the last of the light. Its work done for now, its purpose fulfilled until the sun rises again. He reaches for the folded canvas and begins to count the finished flints, not with the quiet murmur he used earlier, but in silence, his finger moving along the row, touching each flint lightly on its flat back, and his lips move slightly as he counts, forming the numbers without sound. The row has grown long over the course of the afternoon, 40 or 50 flints perhaps, a full day's work laid out in a neat, orderly line, and the counting takes a little while, the finger moving slowly and deliberately, the numbers accumulating in the napper's mind, and when he reaches the end he nods to himself, a small, satisfied dip of the chin, and then he writes the tally in the ledger, the pencil scratching faintly in the quiet room, the numbers appearing on the page in the same neat, careful hand that Fred had fed. The ledger is closed, the heavy cover dropping onto the pages with a soft, dusty thud, and the pencil is returned to the crease, and the napper turns his attention back to the canvas and the row of finished flints. He lifts the far edge of the canvas and folds it over the flints, covering them, and then he folds the near edge, and then the sides, wrapping the flints in a neat, compact bundle, the canvas holding them snugly together so that they will not shift or rattle or chip one another. The bundle is tied with a length of twine that hangs from a peg on the wall, a rough, brown twine made of hemp, and the napper winds it around the bundle twice and ties it with a simple, secure knot, the kind of knot that can be undone easily in the morning but will not come loose on its own. The bundle is then carried to the crate by the door, the napper rising from his stool with a slow, careful movement, his back straightening, his knees creaking faintly, and he walks across the packed earth floor with the bundle cradled in both hands, and he lowers it into the crate, settling it among the other bundles that are already there, the straw rustling softly as it receives the weight. The crate is more than half full now, layers of racked flints alternating with layers of golden straw, and the whole thing has a solid, substantial look. A crate that is slowly becoming heavy with the accumulated labor of weeks. The napper stands by the crate for a moment, looking down at it, and then he turns back to the bench and begins the slow, methodical process of tidying up, a process that is as much a part of the day's work as the knapping itself, a quiet, necessary ritual that restores the workshop to order and readies it for the morning. He picks up the wooden tray from beneath the bench, the tray that is now full almost to overflowing with the waste flakes of the day, a glittering, sharp-edged hoard of grey and black and white fragments, and he carries it to the bin of scrap and tips the contents in, the flakes sliding out of the tray with a loud, clattering rush that is the loudest sound the workshop has heard all day, a brief, jagged cascade of noise that echoes off the walls, and then fades, leaving the silence even deeper than before. The trays return to its place beneath the bench, and the napper takes up a small brush made of bound twigs and sweeps the bench top clean, brushing the last flakes and the fine pale dust into the tray, and then from the tray into the bin, and the brush makes a soft, swishing sound against the wood, a sound that is gentle and rhythmic and deeply calming, a sound of endings and completions and quiet conclusions. The tools are wiped down with a folded linen rag, each one in turn, the antler tine and the hammerstone and the testing hammer and the iron stake, and the rag comes away grey with flint dust, and the napper shakes it out over the bin before folding it and placing it back on the bench. The leather knee pad is lifted from where it hangs and brushed off with the side of the hand, a few last crumbs of flint falling into the bin, and then it is draped over the edge of the bench, ready for the morning, its surface dark and gleaming in the dim light, its hollow center waiting for the first nodule of the new day. The apron is taken down from its peg and shaken once, a sharp, snapping motion that releases a cloud of pale dust into the air, and then it is hung back on the peg, and it sways slightly for a moment before settling into stillness, its worn, cracked surface holding the shape of the napper's body, a ghost of the day's labor. The napper turns now to the small fire in the corner hearth, the fire that has been burning quietly all day and has now reduced itself to a deep bed of glowing embers, and he takes up the iron poker from its hook and stirs the embers gently, releasing a brief flare of orange light that illuminates his face and the wall behind him, and then fades. He adds a few small pieces of wood from the pile beside the hearth, not to build the fire up, but to bank it, to keep the embers alive through the night so that the workshop will still be warm in the morning, and the fire can be revived with a few breaths and a handful of kindling. The fresh wood begins to smoke slightly as it heats, a thin, pale thread that rises into the chimney, and the smell of the smoke is clean and sharp and full of promise, the smell of tomorrow's warmth already beginning. The poker is returned to its hook, and the napper stands before the hearth for a moment, his hands held out to the warmth, his face soft and relaxed in the dim, flickering glow, and then he turns away and the fire settles back into its quiet, patient smouldering. He walks to the door, his footsteps soft on the packed earth, and he lifts the wooden latch and pulls the door open, and the cool, damp air of the evening flows into the workshop, carrying the smells of the river and the wet earth and the first faint sweetness of the spring grass. Outside the sky is a deep, pearly grey, the colour of a dove's breast, and a few early stars are just beginning to appear in the east, faint and tentative, as if they are testing the darkness before committing to the night. The lane is empty, the mist beginning to rise again from the river, the Flint cottages of Brandon standing in quiet dark clusters, their windows glowing here and there with the warm orange light of candles and hearth fires. The napper steps out into the yard, and he stands there for a moment, breathing the evening air, his hands resting on his hips, his face turned toward the sky, and then he turns back and closes the door, latching it with a soft wooden click that echoes once and then is gone. He picks up his canvas bag from its peg, the bag that holds his clay pipe and his tobacco and his spare thumb guards, and he slings it over his shoulder, and then he takes one last look around the workshop, a slow sweeping gaze that passes over the bench and the tools and the crate and the fire and the stacks of nodules against the far wall, checking that everything is in its place, that nothing has been forgotten, that the workshop is ready for the morning. The half-finished blanks lie on the bench where he left them, their edges waiting, and the ledger sits closed on its shelf, and the apron hangs on its peg, and the fire glows quietly behind its grating, and the whole room is still, settled, complete, a small, perfect world that has done its work for the day and now rests. The napper walks to the door, opens it again, and this time he steps through and pulls it close behind him, and the latch falls into place with a soft, final click, and his footsteps fade away down the lane, a slow, steady tread that grows quieter and quieter until it is swallowed by the mist and the silence and the gathering night. The workshop is empty now, but it is not abandoned, for the fire still glows and the dust still settles and the silence still holds the memory of the day's sounds, the tick of the antler tine and the tap of the hammerstone and the soft, steady breathing of the man of the bench. The half-finished blanks wait on the bench, patient and still, and the wrapped flints rest in their bed of straw, and the spider sits at the centre of its web, and the night deepens over Brandon and over Suffolk and over the whole quiet island, and the workshop sleeps. You remain on your stool in the corner, and for a long moment you do not move, do not rise, do not open your eyes, for the stillness of the room has settled into your bones, and the quiet has become a part of you, and the soft grey dimness is like a blanket that has been laid over your thoughts, muffling them, smoothing them, drawing them down into a deep and peaceful rest. The air is cool on your cheeks, and the stool is solid beneath you, and the last faint warmth of the fire reaches you from across the room, and you let your breathing grow slower and deeper, your hands slack on your thighs, your head bowing gently toward your chest. The shapes of the room blur and soften, the bench and the tools and the stacks of flint fading into a single gentle darkness, and the only thing that remains is the quiet, the deep, abiding quiet of the workshop. A quiet that has been building all day and now settles over you like a gentle hand, closing your eyes, stilling your thoughts, and drawing you down, slowly, peacefully, into sleep, into sleep.